the ice and fire demon god of Hogwarts. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 1, Rebirth in the Fire. Sizzle. Sizzle. The scorching flames licked every inch of his skin, and the red flames burned his torn wounds. Lin En's eyes were full of blood red. He pushed the child in his arms out of the fire with all his strength, and half knelt on the ground with some exhaustion. The devouring flames made his skin charred, and the constant pain made him no longer have the strength to get up. Lin En's vision gradually became blurred, not only because of the distorted air under the high temperature, but also because of his gradual loss of consciousness. His world became dark and empty, and the burning sensation brought by the flames gradually faded. After an unknown amount of time, Lin En regained consciousness under a warm light. He opened his eyes and wanted to say something, but he made a baby's tender baby sound. Am I reborn? Lin En raised his chubby hands, and his small eyes were full of confusion. Suddenly, Lin En was picked up by a pair of slender hands covered with ugly wrinkles. Before he could see the owner of these hands, that did not look like human beings, he was placed on the pillow of his mother in this life. His mother in this life was a beautiful woman with long golden hair and black pupils. After learning that her child was born safely, she fell asleep peacefully. Lin En stared at the ceiling, as if he could not accept what was happening in front of him. After a long time, a feeling of fatigue came over him. Lin En closed his eyes and fell asleep. Time passed year by year, just like Merlin's stockings were changed one by one. It seemed that in the blink of an eye, Lin En had been reborn into this world for 11 years. 1990, England, Roll Manor. This is a magnificent medieval manor. In the center of the manor is a castle that looks relatively old. However, although the appearance of the castle looks shabby and full of age, the decoration inside the castle is up to date and full of gorgeous atmosphere. In the room by the window on the second floor of the castle, Lin was standing in front of a full-length mirror with a gold rim. In the full-length mirror was a handsome boy with a slightly immature face, but dark red eyes that showed a bit of maturity. The boy had black hair, and if you look closely, you can even find some dark red in the boy's hair. This dark red hair color that seemed to be highlighted was born with Lin, not died later. In this world, Lin's name is Lin Rowell, which is translated as Lin Rowell. His surname is one of the 28 holy pureblood families. Yes, the world Lin is in now is the magical world of Harry Potter, and when he was just born, the owner of those slender hands full of ugly wrinkles was Gale, the house elf of Rowell Manor. At this time, Lin finished adjusting his tie and looked away from the full-length mirror. Suddenly, a knocking sound came from outside the window. It was an owl that kept knocking on the window to get in, and the owl was holding a letter in its mouth. Finally here? Lin En's eyes flashed with an imperceptible joy. He quickly opened the window, let the grey fluffy owl in, and took the letter from its mouth. The envelope was made of thick parchment, and the address was written in emerald green ink. Rowell Manor, room by the window on the second floor of the castle, to Mr. Lin Rowell. Sure enough, it was the familiar formula. Seeing this address, that could not be more detailed, the corners of Lin's mouth curled up slightly. Lin turned over the envelope and saw a wax seal and a shield emblem on it. The capital H was surrounded by a lion, an eagle, a badger and a snake. Lin, who had read Harry Potter twice in his previous life, was naturally very familiar with the school emblem of Hogwarts. Although he could almost recite the contents of the letter, Lin still took out the first piece of letter paper with a nervous and excited mood. Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Headmaster, Albus Dumbledore, President of the International Confederation of Wizards, Grand Master of the Order of Merlin, Chief Wizard of the Wizengamot. Dear Mr. Rowell, we are pleased to inform you that you have been accepted to study at Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Enclosed is a list of required books and equipment. The semester is scheduled to begin on September 1st. We will wait for you, Rowell, to bring your reply before July 31st. Sincerely, Minerva McGonagall, Vice Headmaster, Female. After reading the first piece of letter, Lin took out the second piece of letter underneath. The second piece of letter wrote the uniforms, books, wands and other equipment that Lin needed to enroll in Hogwarts. After Lin wrote them down one by one, He put it back into the envelope together with the first piece of letter. Lin let out a long sigh. Although he had been prepared for what happened today, when the admission letter from Hogwarts came to him, he still felt like waking up from a dream. Then came the excitement. Which Harry Potter fan didn't dream of receiving a letter of admission to Hogwarts when he was a teenager? Exclamation mark. Snap. Lin carefully put the envelope into his pocket, then raised his hand and snapped his fingers. With a bang, Gale, the house elf of Rao Manor, appeared in front of him. This was a house elf wearing a blue and white pillowcase. Although it looked wrinkled and ugly, the brand new pillowcase and the skin without any dirt made it look very clean. Master, your breakfast is ready. Madam is already eating downstairs. Gale bowed to Lin and said, I know. Lin nodded slightly, then went downstairs. In the center of the hall on the first floor of the castle was a round table, and the blonde woman sitting at the round table was Lin's mother in this life, Rowena Rowell. Lin's mother, Rowena Rowell, is similar in pronunciation to Rowena Ravenclaw, the founder of Hogwarts Ravenclaw College, but the two are not related. Rowena graduated from Slytherin. Lin quickly finished his breakfast, put down his knife and fork, and said, Mom, I just received an owl letter. I will ask Gale to take me to Diagon Alley to buy the books and equipment needed for school admission. Rowena nodded and said softly, be careful. Rowena was not worried about whether Lin would be in danger when he went to Diagon Alley. With Gale, the house elf, following him, even if Lin went to Nocturne Alley, he would not be in too much danger. After all, the magical ability of house elves is higher than that of most wizards. Otherwise, Dobby would not be able to easily repel Lucius Malfoy. After he was freed in the original book, Lin did not say much, but just hugged his mother hard. Since his rebirth, he has been dependent on Rowena. In addition to the house elf Gale, Rowena can be said to be the only person Lin can trust in this world. As for his father, Henry Rowe, he was once a member of the Death Eaters, but 10 years ago, Henry was killed by the suspicious Voldemort with the killing curse, because he concealed something from Voldemort. At that time, Rowena had just become pregnant with him. If it weren't for the Fidelius charm that Rao Manor had been set up, and could not be discovered by Voldemort, I'm afraid even Rowena and Lin, who was still in the womb, would have been killed. But the strange thing is that even Rowena didn't know who was the secret keeper of the Fidelius charm of Rao Manor. Fortunately, Voldemort fell a year after Lin was born, which made Rowena no longer tremble with fear every day. After letting go of her mother, Lin grabbed Gale's left hand. Gale raised his right hand and snapped his fingers. With a loud bang, Lin and Gale disappeared on the spot. London, Leaky Cauldron. Lin and Gale appeared at the door of the Leaky Cauldron. Lin looked around with some curiosity. Although Lin had left Rowell Manor many times in the past 11 years, he had never been to the magical world. In order to protect himself, he had been staying in the muggle world for the past 11 years, suppressing his curiosity. The modern electronic equipment such as refrigerators that can be seen everywhere in the castle are the result of his efforts to transform the castle using muggle technology. In terms of daily life, it has to be admitted that ordinary people know how to enjoy more than these conservative wizards. Lin's first impression of the Leaky Cauldron was that it was dirty. The lights in the Leaky Cauldron were very dim, and the tables and floors of the bar seemed to be covered with a layer of oil stains, which made people feel uncomfortable. It seems to be a new face. Young wizard, is it your first time to the Leaky Cauldron? Old Tom, the owner of the Leaky Cauldron, happily wiped the cup in his hand with a rag while looking up at Lin. His eyes passed Lin and saw Gale, the house elf behind Lin, and he understood. It seems to be a young wizard from a pure-blood family. Yes, sir. I want to enter Diagon Alley, Lin replied. Old Tom nodded, and he walked behind the bar, wiping the dirty cup in his hand. Lin followed him to a small courtyard surrounded by walls, and his eyes were cast on the lonely trash can placed by the wall. Remember, count 3 bricks up from here, count 2 bricks horizontally, and finally knock it with your wand. Old Tom routinely knocked on the wall 3 times with the top of his wand. The bricks he knocked on shook rapidly, and these bricks moved, forming a gradually larger hole in the middle, which eventually turned into a wide archway. Opposite the archway was a cobblestone street, which was Diagon Alley, the most prosperous commercial street in the British wizarding world. Lin crossed the hole and turned back before the hole began to shrink. By the way, why don't you use magic to clean the cup? I think the descaling charm should be able to achieve this goal. Old Tom shook the dirty cup in his hand and laughed, but this is part of the fun. Just like you can go directly to Diagon Alley, right? As soon as old Tom finished speaking, the shrinking hole disappeared and turned into a wall again. Seeing this, Lin laughed dumbly. Yes, just like he could have asked the house elf Gale to take him to Diagon Alley directly, but he had to experience the famous scene in person through the leaky cauldron. Invested internally. Everyone can invest with confidence. Chapter 2. Redwood grafted onto Paulonia wood, burning the sky, and boiling the sea. Walking on the streets of Diagon Alley, Lin took out the list again. First, I have to go to Gringotts to get the money, and then go to Ollivander's one shop. Lin took out a rusty metal key from his pocket and thought so. There are many shops in Diagon Alley, and the one that attracts him most is Ollivander's one shop, which sells wands that can help him control magic and cast magic. Soon, Lin saw a snow-white building with a bronze door. On the bronze door, 3 big characters Gringotts can be seen. On both sides of the bronze door, there stood a goblin wearing a scarlet uniform with gold inlays. After seeing Gale behind Lin, these goblins recognized Lin's identity as a young wizard from a pureblood family, and they flattered Lin. In the eyes of these greedy goblins, gold galleons are everything, and pureblood families with a lot of wealth will naturally be treated as guests of honor by them. Lin En straightened his collar and crossed the door of Gringotts. When he was about to cross the second silver door, a line of words engraved on the door appeared in front of him. Come in, stranger, but you must be careful of what will happen if you are greedy. If you just ask for something without working, you will be punished most severely. Therefore, if you want to take a fortune that never belongs to you from our underground vault, thief, you have been warned. Be careful that you will not bring treasure, but retribution. Seeing this sentence, Lin En just laughed it off. Greedy, this word is the most appropriate to describe goblins. In Lin En's opinion, this sentence may be more reasonable to use to warn goblins. Moreover, the only thing that can protect wealth is power. Only when you have enough power can you protect what you want to protect. Otherwise, you can only sigh in despair at everything that has been plundered. After entering Gringotts, Lin En handed over the metal key and then took a cart led by a goblin and drove along the railway towards the underground. The cart was whirring, and the sharp cold wind blew across Lin's face. The next second, another waterfall poured heavily on him, soaking him like a drowned chicken. The waterfall that poured on Lin was called the anti-thief waterfall, which had the effect of washing away all spells and removing magical disguises. Of course, disguise methods such as human skin masks that were not processed by any magic would not be discovered by the anti-thief waterfall. The fairy who was driving the cart quickly snapped his fingers before Lin and Gale beside him could get angry and used a spell to dry the water off Lin's body. Not long after, a huge fire dragon appeared in their sight. The fire dragon sensed their arrival and tried to spit out flames to attack them, but the fairy who was controlling the cart quickly took out a small metal tool from his arms and shook it in the air. A loud and crisp ding-dong sound rang out, and the fire dragon seemed to sense something particularly terrifying and let out a hoarse roar and then retreated again and again. Dear guest, this beast will have a conditioned reflex to this thing called ding-dang slices. When it hears this sound, it will think of pain and retreat, not daring to attack us. The goblin explained to Lin. Lin nodded slightly, indicating that he understood. Soon, they arrived at the vault controlled by the Owl family. The goblin pressed his palm on the door of the vault, and the door of the vault disappeared. At this time, the golden light seemed to blind Lin's eyes. Although Lin had some guesses about the Owl family's property, after seeing the pile of gold galleons and the rare treasures all over the ground, Lin admitted that he was shocked. Lin took out a bag with a traceless extension spell cast on it, and put thousands of gold galleons into it. Even so, the hill in the vault did not show any sign of decreasing. It can be seen how huge this hill of gold galleons is. After taking out the money, Lin and Gale returned to the ground smoothly and left Gringotts. After buying a cup of chocolate and crushed nut ice cream for himself and Gale when passing by Florin Fosco's ice cream shop, Lin came to Ollivander's one shop. This is a small and shabby shop from the outside. The golden sign on the door has peeled off, and it reads, Ollivander, making fine wands, since 382 BC. In the shop window, there is a faded purple cushion, and on the cushion there is a wand. Lin walked into Ollivander's wand shop, and what caught his eye were thousands of narrow boxes that almost reached the ceiling. Hello, are you Mr. Ollivander, the wand maker? Lin asked an old man with a pair of light-colored eyes who appeared in front of them. Mr. Ollivander smiled and replied, oh, yes. Good afternoon, little wizard. Lin nodded and said, hello, Mr. Ollivander, my name is Lin Rowe, and I'm here to buy a wand. Mr. Ollivander was not surprised to hear Lin's words. He took out a long tape measure with silver scales from his pocket, and started to measure Lin. Oh, of course. The little wizards who come to me are all here, to get a wand that suits them best. Okay, Mr. Rowe, come here, let me see. Which arm do you use to wield the wand? Mr. Ollivander said as he measured Lin's size. Each Ollivander wand has a super strong magical substance, which is also its essence. Mr. Ollivander said with a little pride, we use unicorn hair, phoenix tail feathers and dragon heart nerves. Each Ollivander wand is unique, because no two magical creatures are exactly the same. Of course, if you use a wand that should belong to another wizard, it will never have such a good effect. Remember, Mr. All, the wand chooses the wizard. Mr. Ollivander quickly measured the size, and then shuffled between the shelves, selecting long boxes containing wands one by one. Ah, right. There are no useless wands, only useless wizards, right? Lin said casually, his eyes focused on an unfinished wand deep in the wand shop. To be honest, he was very curious about the production process of the wand. Hearing what Lin En said, Mr. Ollivander's eyes lit up. He grabbed a handful of long boxes he had just selected, and quickly came to Lin En, grabbing Lin En's hands with his other hand. You are so right. Mr. All, I didn't expect that you have such a profound understanding of wands at such a young age. Mr. Ollivander said very happily. Obviously, he was very satisfied that his views were recognized. Seeing Mr. Ollivander's reaction, Lin En also touched his nose a little embarrassedly. In all honesty, he was just playing a joke. Try this one. Grapevine wood, phoenix tail feathers, 11 inches long. The flexibility is pretty good. You try to wave it. Mr. Ollivander handed a wand to Lin En. Lin En held the wand and waved it hard. I saw a beam of light burst out from the wand, hitting a shelf not far away fiercely, and then it exploded. The violent airwave swept over, overturning several shelves around, and the shelf that was hit even exploded with sawdust all over the sky. Seeing this scene, Lin En's eyelids jumped. Wow, this power is comparable to the thunderbolt explosion of an adult wizard, right? Exclamation mark. Oh no, it's definitely not this one. Mr. Ollivander snatched the wand. He didn't seem to care about the broken shelves. Instead, he frowned and took out a black wand from another long box. Try it, ebony, unicorn hair, 8¼ inches. Mr. Ollivander said. As soon as Lin En held the wand, a ball of magic suddenly exploded from his palm, and the wand flew several meters away. Mr. Ollivander hurriedly picked up the wand with a distressed look, and put it back into the long box. It's not this one either. Damn it. Mr. Ollivander seemed to be less confident in his judgment. He went back to the shelves to pick and choose, and finally took out a long box wrapped in red silk. Try this, mahogany, 13¼ inches, dragon's heartstring. The material is a bit fragile, you have to be careful. Mr. Ollivander carefully handed a wand that looked relatively delicate to Lin. Lin held the wand and felt a sense of blessing. He subconsciously waved the wand in his hand. Swish. In an instant, endless flames flew up from the ground. The red flames with a bit of gold instantly enveloped the entire Ollivander wand shop. The flames were reflected in Mr. Ollivander's frightened but excited eyes. The raging flames seemed to burn the sky and boil the sea, covering Lin, Gale and Mr. Ollivander. But surprisingly, this seemingly terrifying flame did not cause any substantial harm to them. At most, their skin felt a little hot. Yes, that's it. Mr. Ollivander shouted excitedly. At this moment, the flames in the sky dissipated, and strange red lines quietly appeared on the wand. The sharp-eyed Mr. Ollivander noticed this scene. He grabbed Lin's hand holding the wand, looked at the wand, and said in surprise, wait, I seem to be a little blind. This is not an ordinary mahogany wand, but a wand made of branches cut from a magical tree after mahogany and sycamore wood were grafted together. Moreover, the sycamore wood grafted with mahogany is not the sycamore wood of the muggle world, but a kind of wood with powerful power in the eastern magic world. Sycamore wood has a very high affinity for flames. It's no wonder that this wand will release such a powerful flame when it recognizes you as its master. Mahogany grafted with sycamore wood, plus the dragon's heartstring. Mr. All, I believe you will be able to achieve a very high achievement. Mr. Ollivander said happily. Usually, the dragon's heartstring will produce a powerful wand and can cast the most gorgeous magic, and the owner of a wand made of a dragon's heartstring often learns faster than the owner of other types of wands. Coupled with the reputation of redwood being able to bring good luck to its owner, and the affinity of sycamore wood for fire, this already determined that Lin En's talent would not be too bad. Of course, even if one were to think that Lin En's magic talent was not that good, then at least in terms of fire magic, Lin En must have a unique talent. Otherwise, he would not have been accepted by the sycamore wood from the east. Chapter 3 Silent Casting. Extremely strong affinity for fire. 7 galleons. Thank you. Mr. Ollivander said to Lin, after choosing a wand for her. Lin motioned to Gale, who was holding the purse, to pay. After buying the wand, Lin took Gale to Flourish and Blots, Madame Malkin's robe shop, Partridge's Cauldron and other shops in Diagon Alley, to buy the items needed for school admission. However, Lin did not go to the magical creatures shop or Ella Owl shop to buy a pet, because in his opinion, he did not need to keep a pet for the time being, and Lin did not necessarily have to buy an owl of his own for sending letters. After all, at Rao Manor, Lin could choose Gale, a more efficient house elf, to send letters, and at Hogwarts, Lin could also borrow Hogwarts public owls from the owl shed on the top floor of the West Tower to send letters. After buying all the equipment, Lin asked Gale to take him back to Rao Manor by apparition. Mom, I'm back. Here's the key. Lin returned the key to Gringotts to Rowena. Rowena put away the key and said to Lin En with a smile in her eyes, okay, go and organize your equipment. I know you can't wait. Lin En smiled. As Rowena said, after buying these equipment, Lin En couldn't wait to go upstairs to organize them. Lin En returned to his room on the second floor and took out a small black school bag with dark red lines from under a large desk. This school bag was also cast with a traceless extension spell, and the space inside was equivalent to 10 large suitcases. He took out the equipment he had bought earlier from the original bag one by one and classified them according to magic books. Potion materials, magic props such as crucibles, magic equipment such as protective gloves, and clothes such as robes. The first thing Lin En put in front of him was a pile of potion materials. In addition to some magic materials necessary for admission, Lin En also foresightedly bought fire ash snake eggs, horseradish sea onion bulbs, thyme tincture, bird snake eggshells, rue powder and other raw materials for making the elixir. Although Lin En doesn't know how to make the elixir of life yet, he is confident that he will be able to learn how to make it in the future after having been exposed to chemical experiments in his previous life. Moreover, even if these materials are expensive, they are just a drop in the bucket for the Roll family. You know, many potion masters in the magic world rely on countless gold galleons. After sorting these potion materials into his school bag, Lin En began to pack up other magic props. In order to prevent accidents in the troubled Hogwarts, Lin En bought each magic prop and magic equipment according to the highest standards, and bought an extra copy for backup. In addition, Lin En also prepared some daily potions such as white fresh essence for backup. After packing these, it was time to take the textbooks needed for class. Lin En did not put them into his school bag immediately, but placed them neatly on the bookshelf. Although he was not a book king like Hermione, if he could learn more magic before entering the magic world, Lin En would still be very willing. After all, if you learn magic in advance, you can just do it well in class. Thinking of this, Lin En pulled out the standard book of spells, elementary from the bookshelf. Lin En flipped through the standard book of spells, elementary with one hand, and took out the wand from his waist with the other hand. Luminous. Lin En followed the spells and gestures in the book, chanting the luminous spell, while waving the wand. The luminous spell can be said to be the simplest of all magic. Lin En only tried it for the first time, and saw a faint white light appear on the top of the wand. Although the light ball looked very weak, it was able to barely illuminate Lin En's bedroom. Knocks. Lin En chanted the spell again, and the light ball went out. The first time he cast magic, even if it was just the most basic luminous spell, Lin En felt an extremely wonderful experience. Is this magic? Exclamation mark. Lin En's eyes seemed to contain light. Wingardium Leviosa. Lin En waved his wand and aimed it at a feather pen in front of him. Under the control of magic, the feather pen jumped up, shook in the air, and then fell back to its original place. Obviously, Lin En's levitation spell failed this time. However, Lin En was not frustrated about it. After all, this was only his first time to cast it. Lin En continued to wave his wand and practiced the use of the levitation spell. Half an hour later, Lin En was barely able to stably control a book to float in the air 2 or 3 meters above the ground. This was still a big gap from Ron's stick to control the troll in the original book. Of course, this was not because Lin En's talent was not as high as Ron's, but because magic was idealistic. The reason why Ron was able to cast the levitation spell that even adult wizards might not be able to do was mainly because his desire was strong enough, so strong that his levitation spell appeared a miracle for a moment. An afternoon passed quickly, and Lin En practiced several basic spells that he was more familiar with in his previous life in his bedroom. At this time, the standard spells, elementary in Lin's hand turned to the page of the fire spell. Gale, help me clean up the backyard. I need a vacant space to practice spells. Lin snapped his fingers, summoned the house elf Gale, and then instructed him. Unlike life spells such as the glowing spell and the levitation spell, Lin would never dare to practice offensive spells such as the fire spell in his bedroom. Otherwise, even if the castle casts protective magic, at least Lin's own bed will be burned to ashes. Lin doesn't want to sleep on the floor at night. Okay, master. Gale bowed to Lin and disappeared. Through the window, Lin could see Gale, who appeared in the backyard with an apparition, casting magic to clean up some useless piles elsewhere. Since Rowell Manor has not been open to the public for more than a decade, most of the gardens outside the castle have been abandoned. Although Gale is willing to spend time every day to take care of the manor, Lin and Rowena agree that this is unnecessary, so Gale gave up. After Gale cleared a piece of open space, Lin En came to the backyard. He pulled out his wand, and the feeling of blessing appeared again. He subconsciously waved the wand and chanted the spell, Flame. Incendio. Almost without any pause, a large ball of red flame spewed out from the wand as he wished, turning into a raging fire burning in the backyard. The temperature of the flame was so high that the surrounding air seemed a little distorted. Seeing this, Lin En was a little shocked. The power of this fire spell might be comparable to the fire spell cast by an adult wizard. Seeing that the fire continued to expand and began to spread towards the backyard wall, Lin En waved his wand in a panic, trying to take the flame back. But he seemed to have forgotten that the fire spell could only release flames, but not take them back. But at this moment, a strange scene appeared. The flame that almost spread to the entire backyard slowly shrank towards the middle under Lin En's strong desire to take it back, and finally dissipated in the air. Lin En was somewhat incredulous. At the moment, when he just took back the flame, he felt as if the flame was a part of his body and he could control it, as if it were his own. Burning flames. Lin En chanted the spell again in disbelief, summoning a large ball of flames. This time, Lin En did not let the flames spread, but tried to control them, just like he had just controlled them to dissipate. Lin En waved the wand in his hand, and he was surprised to find that the ball of flame he had just released actually moved with the waving of his wand. The flame spread to the direction his wand pointed. Is it because of the power of this mahogany grafted sycamore wand? Lin En carefully examined the wand in his hand, and he found that when he controlled the flame, the red lines on the wand body became more vivid. Lin En's speed of mastering and controlling the fire spell was unmatched by any other spell. Even the first successful glow spell was not as powerful as the fire spell that could directly match that of an adult wizard. This strong control over fire may come from the affinity of the sycamore wood for fire, or it may come from Lin En himself. After all, since Lin En was chosen by this mahogany grafted sycamore wood wand, his own affinity for fire is probably not much lower. Of course, this can only be verified when Lin En learns to cast spells without a wand in the future and casts the fire spell without a wand. Lin En continued to practice the fire spell. As time went by, he gradually became able to sense the flow of magic power in his body when he cast spells, which was an experience he could not have when casting other magic. 3 days passed quickly. Lin En learned many common spell casting methods from standard spells, elementary, and the most obvious improvement was naturally his fire spell. At this time, Lin En appeared in the backyard again. Unlike before, he planned to try the silent spell of the fire spell. After 3 days of practice, Lin En had firmly memorized the flow trajectory of the magic power in his body when he cast the fire spell, which gave him the opportunity to try to control the magic power to move according to the previous flow trajectory without reciting the spell. Lin En felt the not so strong magic power in his body and slowly controlled it to flow toward the wand along the trajectory of the flow when he cast the fire spell. This was a very slow process, but when Lin En tried to silently recite the spell of the fire spell in his mind, he was surprised to find that the process was shortened by nearly 100 times. Lin En was only thinking about the spell of the fire spell in his mind, but he did not recite it out loud, but the flames spewed out of his wand very smoothly and burned quickly in the backyard. Silent casting. Success. Lin En felt very happy. Although the flames cast by the silent spell were slightly less powerful than before, they still reached the level of owls. Chapter 4 Platform 9. First meeting with the Weir Light Winds. The red flames were burning in the backyard. Lin En could feel a wave of heat coming towards him just by getting closer. This flame can't seem to hurt me. As he stared at the flames, such a thought suddenly came into Lin En's mind. Lin En tried to reach out and touch the flames burning in the yard. He felt a burning sensation instantly, but that was all. The blazing flames could not cause Lin En to suffer more harm. This was not the effect of the fire spell. Although the fire spell summoned magical flames, it did not distinguish between friend and foe, and could burn everything around it recklessly. However, when it faced Lin En, it seemed to have seen its master and became obedient. There was even a small ball of flame that attached itself to Lin En's palm and danced slightly at his fingertips. Lin En was a little surprised by this. You know, magic that can prevent fire from harming oneself is not uncommon. The first generation of Dark Lord Grindelwald's Fire Shield can make Fiendfire use it for himself. However, Fire Shield is a fusion of Fiendfire and armor, and it has defensive magic ability. However, the fire spell released by Lin En is just an ordinary magic flame. Moreover, this flame only does not work on Lin En. When facing other flammable objects, it will still turn into a demon that devours everything. So it's my problem? Lin En fell into doubt. Lin En is not the kind of reckless man who is blindly confident and wants to explore it alone without knowing anything, and finally puts himself and the people around him in a desperate situation. When he encounters a problem he doesn't understand, he naturally asks people with higher magic skills. So, after extinguishing the fire in the backyard, Lin En returned to the castle and found his mother Irina. After learning about Lin En's situation, Rowena pondered for a while and took out a beautiful willow wand from her arms. She raised her hand and waved it, and with a beautiful silent spell, a ball of fire suddenly appeared between the two of them. Rowena's control over the flame was also very good. The flame burned in the air, but there was no tendency to spread. Try it. Will this flame hurt you? Rowena said, controlling the flame to move towards Lin En. Lin En reached out and touched the flame, shook his head and said, it's the same as my fire spell. It can make me feel the burning sensation, but it can't really hurt me. Rowena nodded slightly and waved her wand again to extinguish the flame. Rowena looked at Lin En's dark red hair thoughtfully and said, since my flame can't hurt you, it means that it's not the flame's problem, but your physical condition. However, it's unknown whether the root of the problem comes from your blood or other magical powers. But as far as I know, neither the Luo family nor my former family has ever had such a precedent. Of course, there may be a possibility of inheritance from the previous generation, and the predecessors who possessed this power were not recorded in the family history. At least, for now, this power is beneficial to you, isn't it? In the magic world, it's not uncommon for little wizards to have some magical powers. Rowena smiled softly and said softly. Hearing this, Lin En nodded slightly. As Rowena said, it's not uncommon for wizards to have special powers in the magic world, just like the prophecy talent inherited from the previous generation of the Trelawney family, or the charm ability of the mixed-blooded Veela. Yes, my strong affinity for fire allowed me to control the silent casting of the fire spell in just 3 days, and it also prevented the fire from harming me. Lin no longer worried about the source of his talent. His strong affinity for fire allowed him to easily achieve far more than ordinary people in fire magic, and what he had to do was to give full play to his talent as much as possible and let his special talent be displayed. Time passed as fast as Merlin taking off his stockings. In the blink of an eye, a month had passed. On this day, Lin carried his black school bag, and after saying goodbye to his mother Rowena, he asked Gale to use apparition to take him to King's Cross Station. There was a sound of gas explosion, and Lin and Gale appeared in an empty corner of King's Cross Station. Lin walked out of the pillar that covered his figure and saw the people coming and going around him. In order to avoid being discovered by the muggles, Gale hid his figure as soon as he arrived here. After saying goodbye to Gale softly, Lin carried his school bag and held the ticket and walked towards the platform 9 in his memory. Not far away, many boys or girls with their parents pushing strollers were heading towards the wall between platform 9 and platform 10. Most of these children had one thing in common, which was that there was often an owl cage on their strollers. An adult man stood beside the wall, and Lin could vaguely see a wand stuck in his waist. Obviously, this adult man was the wizard responsible for maintaining order here, and this area was obviously under a confusing spell, and the muggles on both sides turned a blind eye to the strange scene happening here. The young wizards passed through the wall one by one, and some of the muggle-born first-year students actually ran with a fearless spirit when pushing their strollers through the wall. This made Lin look sideways. Since the luggage was stuffed into the school bag with the traceless extension spell, Lin seemed relaxed when passing through the wall. Coming to the other side of platform 9, Lin En saw a crimson retro steam locomotive parked next to the platform full of young wizards. On the sign hanging on the train was a line of words, Hogwarts Express, 11 o'clock. Looking at this line of words, and recalling the speed of this train in the original book, Lin En couldn't help but chuckle. It is worthy of being the Hogwarts Express train. Thinking of this, Lin En boarded the train, and walked straight to a compartment near the end of the train. Lin En sat down by the window, and took out a notebook that looked a little old from his school bag. This was Rowena's notes on fire magic, when she was still studying at Hogwarts. This notebook, whose pages were already yellow, was a treasure in Lin En's eyes. By learning from his mother's experience, he was able to make the flame burn freely in the air without any flammable materials under the premise of silent casting, and he could freely control the size and shape of the flame. "Excuse me, is there any vacant seat in this box?" Just then, a hearty voice came from the door of the box. 2 red-haired boys walked in from the door of the box. The 2 red-haired boys looked almost identical, obviously twin brothers. The badge of Gryffindor House was on the chest of the wizard robes they changed into. The moment he saw the 2, Lin knew their identities in his heart. George Weasley and Fred Weasley. Red hair, twins, Gryffindor. These recognizable features made their identities clear at a glance. "There are vacant seats here, sit wherever you want." Lin closed the notebook in his hand and said to the 2. Fred thanked him, and then he and George worked hard to push the suitcase with luggage to the corner of the box. "Wingardium Leviosa." Seeing that their faces were a little red, Lin took out his wand from his arms and kindly helped them move the suitcase to the corner of the box with a floating spell. Seeing this scene, Fred and George were both stunned. "Thank you, buddy. If it weren't for you, we would have forgotten that we are wizards," George said to Lin with a smile. He took out his wand and cast a clean-up spell on his dusty robe. Fred also cast a cleaning spell on himself, and then the 2 sat down opposite Lin. "Fred Weasley, nice to meet you." "George Weasley, nice to meet you." The Weasley twins stretched out their hands to Lin at the same time and said. Lin held their hands and smiled. "Lin Rowe, nice to meet you." Hearing this, the 2 were stunned at first, and then showed a relieved expression. George said, "I was just wondering, you are a freshman who has not yet entered school, but you can use the levitation spell so skillfully. I didn't expect you to be a little wizard from the Rao family." Generally speaking, little wizards from pure-blood families often come into contact with magic earlier than their peers, so George thought Lin had been learning magic for a long time. Lin smiled and shook his head, not telling him that he had only been in contact with magic for 2 months. Lin looked at the Gryffindor badges on their chests and said, "You are all students of Gryffindor College, right? I don't know which college I will enter." Fred said, "Yes, we are all second-year students of Gryffindor." At this time, George glanced at the notebook at Lin's hand and said thoughtfully, "As far as I know, the people of the Rowell family are all graduates of Slytherin. People with the blood of the Rowell family are also likely to enter Slytherin College, but if it is you, Rowell, you are likely to go to Ravenclaw College." Fred nodded and said, "Yes, most of the diligent little wizards, like you, will go to Ravenclaw." Hearing this, Lin glanced at the notebook at hand, which had not been closed yet, and laughed dumbly. "Lin, just call me Lin," Lin said kindly. Hearing the meaning of making friends in Lin's words, Fred and George looked at each other and said to Lin in unison, "Lin, just call us by our names." Just as the three were about to continue chatting, the door of the box was pushed open again. A fat woman with a smile and dimples came in with a cart of snacks. "Dear, do you want to buy any food on the cart?" Lin looked at the cart, and a large amount of magical food was loaded on the cart, such as Bibi multi-flavor beans, blowing super bubble gum, chocolate frog, crucible cake, licorice wand and other snacks. Even the relatively niche cockroach pile, Lin could see a few boxes. However, the cockroaches that were still crawling in the box made Lin really unable to appreciate it. Perhaps only a certain old bee would have a special liking for such a weird dessert as cockroach pile. Faced with a cart of food, the weird light winds were silent. In this timeline, they have not made much money by inventing magic products, so they are a little short of money. 3 chocolate frogs, please. Fred hesitated for a long time, counted out some copper nuts from his pocket, and handed them to the fat woman. If there were only 2 of them in the box, Fred would choose to spend the time with the sandwiches, prepared by Mrs. Weirlie. But they met new friends, and Fred still hoped to treat them with food from the magical world. Chapter 5 Alchemy, the origin of magical products. Except for the cockroach pile, take 3 portions of the other snacks each. Lin saw the Weird Lightwind's dilemma, and their actions touched him a little, so he generously took out a handful of gold galleons from his purse that had been cast with the traceless stretching spell, intending to be an Avorish like Harry Potter next year. The fat woman looked at Lin in surprise, and then took 3 portions of each snack, except the cockroach pile, and gave them to Lin, and took 3 chocolate frogs to the Weird Lightwinds. "Let's eat together. I can't finish so many." After watching the fat woman leave the box, Lin said to the Weird Lightwinds with a smile. Fred and George looked at each other. Fred took a sizzling bee candy from the snack pile, put it in his mouth, and kept saying while chewing, "Hiss, so sweet. I bet Professor Dumbledore must like this." George handed one of their chocolate frogs to Lin. Lin En was not polite. He tore open the package, pinched the back foot of the chocolate frog that wanted to escape with one hand, and threw it into his mouth. After eating the chocolate frog, Lin En took out another card from the package. On the card was a man with light blue eyes and short black hair. The man's glasses reflected 2 white lights, making him look very serious, but his deep eyes were a bit gloomy. Lin En turned over the card and looked at the text on the back. Wallace & Green, a famous French alchemist and a direct disciple of the great alchemist Nicolas Flamel. Mr. Green's well-known contributions include participating in the capture of the Black Wizard Grindelwald in 1945, inventing the alchemical product Forbidden Magic Stone, and making breakthroughs in alchemy with his teacher Nicolas Flamel. After reading this text, Lin En's eyes condensed. This Mr. Wallace & Green is a character outside the original work, and his participation in the capture of the Black Wizard Grindelwald is inconsistent with Lin En's understanding of the original work. Of course, the magic world is a complete world, and it is not possible to get a glimpse of the whole picture in just one novel. It is not surprising that there are some powerful wizards in the magic world that are not recorded in the book. However, the alchemical product Forbidden Magic Stone invented by Wallace & Green made Lin a little afraid. At this time, Fred and George also tore open their chocolate frog packaging, wailing that their cards were all Dumbledore. After seeing the card in Lin's hand, George said with interest, "Mr. Wallace & Green, This card is a relatively rare one. Lin, you are lucky. Seeing the two looking at him, Lin asked directly, do you know Mr. Green? I want to know what kind of item the alchemical product Forbidden Magic Stone is among his contributions. Looking at Lin's nervous look, the We're Light Twins laughed. After a while, Fred stroked his chest and explained to Lin En, who was puzzled, the alchemical product Forbidden Stone invented by Mr. Wallace and Green has a certain ability to suppress magical power. After he launched this alchemical product, it was once sought after by the Ministry of Magic of various countries and was used to protect important places in the Ministry of Magic, such as the Department of Mysteries of our British Ministry of Magic. However, the ability of the Forbidden Stone to suppress magical power is not as strong as imagined. A piece of Forbidden Stone the size of a quaffle can only reduce the magic ability of wizards within a range of 10 meters by less than 10%, and it has no effect at all on a powerful Demon King level wizard like Professor Dumbledore. After getting the explanation, Lin En suddenly understood. Yes, if the effect of this so-called Forbidden Stone is too strong, I'm afraid that it will not be sought after by the Ministry of Magic of various countries, but will be banned. At this time, George smiled and said to Lin, you have also seen the power of alchemical products. This is all thanks to alchemy. The shorthand quills commonly used by reporters and the dung bombs in Zanko's joke shop are all magical products made through alchemy. Lin nodded slightly. He had some impression of these things. He remembered that the We're Light Twins seemed to have opened a We're Lies Wizard Wheezes later. Fred said in a distressed tone, we have wanted to learn alchemy for a long time, but alchemy is an elective course that only 6th and 7th graders can take, and ancient runes can only be taken in the 3rd grade. George sang in unison, so we borrowed the Ancient Rune Simple Introduction, Dictionary of Runes and Magic Pronunciation table from the 6th grade Ravenclaw Senior with a can of Fizzy candy, and planned to learn ancient runes in advance, and then learn alchemy. Fred said, George and I have thought about it. After learning these runes, we must first improve the dung bomb and give Filch a little shock. Oh, by the way, Filch is the administrator of Hogwarts. Lin didn't expect that the We're Light Twins started to get in touch with alchemy so early, but this is not surprising. After all, when Harry Potter entered school, the We're Light Twins were already able to improve the dung bomb, and they were only in the 3rd grade at that time. After the introduction of the We're Light Twins, Lin found that he was also interested in alchemy. So, Lin asked, can I also read the books you borrowed? I also want to get in touch with ancient runes in advance. The We're Light Twins agreed without hesitation. Fred walked to the corner of the box and found 3 somewhat worn magic books from the luggage on the ground. These were the Ancient Magic Rune Simple Introduction, Magic Rune Dictionary and Magic Pronunciation Table that George had mentioned before. Lin took the magic books from him, and as a thank you, Lin also lent the notebook that recorded his mother's understanding of the fire spell to the two of them. This is some of my mother's understanding of the fire spell when she studied at Hogwarts, Lin explained to the We're Light Twins. Fred took the notebook and joked, Lin, with the help of this notebook, your fire spell should be quite powerful, right? Lin nodded, took out the wand from his arms, and waved it gently. With a beautiful silent spell, a ball of flame appeared out of thin air between them, jumping up and down. Feeling the burning sensation coming, the corners of their mouths twitched. Fred never expected that Lin's fire spell would be so powerful. God knows, he was just joking. Silent casting. This is silent casting. I'm afraid even adult wizards who graduated from Hogwarts can rarely cast spells silently. Fred and George shouted wildly in their hearts. Chapter 6 Sorting Ceremony. It's just a fire spell. I cast other spells just like you do. Lin shook her head and said. Fred and George just nodded and didn't ask any more questions. Talent for a certain kind of magic power often comes from the blood, and this involves personal privacy. Fred and George didn't want to explore other people's privacy. Soon, the long journey was spent in the study of the 3 people. As the sun set, the train slowed down. The train will arrive at Hogwarts in 5 minutes. Please leave your luggage on the train. We will take you to school. The broadcast echoed in the compartment. The We're Light Twins immediately closed the notebooks on the table and took out their wands from their arms. Wizard robes fly. Wizard robes fly. The two cast the flying spell at the same time and summoned their wizard robes from a pile of luggage in the corner of the compartment. As the weird light winds turned around, the wizard robes were put on them. Lin also closed the book Ancient Magic Rune Simple Introduction in his hand, took out the wizard robe from his backpack, and used the levitation spell to control it to put on himself. Lin, your backpack has been cast with the Traceless extension spell, right? Fred realized that Lin had no other luggage except the backpack in his hand, so he asked curiously. Lin nodded. At this time, the train stopped, and the young wizards pushed and shoved towards the door. The weird light winds also pulled Lin and squeezed towards the door. Soon, the three of them left the train and went down to a small dark platform. The cold air that hit them made the weird light winds shiver. Not far away, a lamp was switching on and off above the heads of the young wizards, and a tall figure was shouting loudly, "First year students! First year students, come here!" This was a tall man with a full beard and a moleskin coat. His unusual figure made him stand out among the young wizards. Yes, this tall gentleman is Rubeus Hagrid, the gamekeeper of Hogwarts. Go quickly, see you in the castle hall later. Fred patted Lin's shoulder and said with a smile. Lin said goodbye to the weird light winds and went to Hagrid. I'm Rubeus Hagrid, the keykeeper and gamekeeper of Hogwarts. You follow closely, Hagrid said in his rough voice. The young wizards followed Hagrid down a steep and narrow path. It was pitch black around them, and the starlight in the sky was not enough to illuminate the road here. Seeing this, Lin gently waved his wand, and a small ball of fire rose out of thin air amid the exclamations of the young wizards, and it was steadily suspended in the air, illuminating the way forward for the young wizards. Hagrid, who was holding a dim oil lamp, was stunned for a moment, and then praised, "Beautiful fire spell. Little wizard, what's your name?" Lin bowed to Hagrid gracefully and said, "Lin Rowell, Mr. Hagrid." Hagrid patted Lin's shoulder heavily to show encouragement, and the terrifying force almost made Lin fall. Since Hagrid was far away from Lin just now, he just thought that Lin's voice was relatively low, and he didn't know that Lin was casting spells silently, otherwise he would never be so calm. At the end of this narrow path is a black lake. On the hillside across the lake stands a majestic and ancient castle, with spires standing in rows on the castle, and windows flickering in the faint starlight. Rows of small boats are moored on the shore of the lake, and these small boats are used to welcome new students. No more than 4 people on each boat. Hagrid pointed at these small boats and said loudly to the little wizards. Hearing this, the little wizards immediately crowded towards the boats. Lin stood there, and only after the other little wizards had boarded the boat did he extinguish the flames in the air and boarded a boat with Hagrid, who was also the last one. The boats crossed the mirror-like lake and headed towards the towering castle. When the boat in front approached a cliff, Hagrid shouted loudly, "Bow." In fact, except for Hagrid himself, no one else would touch the cliff, even if they didn't bow their heads. Soon, a group of little wizards arrived at the castle, and Lin returned to the team of first-year students. Hagrid walked up and knocked hard on the oak door of the castle 3 times with his huge fist. The door was opened, and a witch in an emerald green robe stood at the door with a serious face. "The first-year students are all here, Professor McGonagall," Hagrid said. "Thank you, Hagrid." Professor McGonagall nodded, opened the door completely, and let the little wizards in. Professor McGonagall led the little wizards along the stone floor of the castle and finally came to an empty room. "Welcome to Hogwarts," said Professor McGonagall. "The feast is about to begin, but before you take your seats in the Great Hall, you will need to decide which house you will be assigned to. Sorting is an important ceremony, because your house will be like your home at Hogwarts during your time at school. You will go to class with other students in your house, live in the house dormitory together, and spend your spare time in the house common room together. The names of the 4 houses are Gryffindor, Hufflepuff, Ravenclaw and Slytherin. Each house has its own glorious history and has cultivated outstanding wizards. During your time at Hogwarts, your outstanding performance will earn your house extra points, and any violation of the rules will cause your house to lose points. At the end of the year, the house with the highest score will receive the house cup, which is a great honor. I hope that, no matter which house you are assigned to, you will bring honor to your house." After finishing the welcome speech, Professor McGonagall led everyone through the foyer and then through a double door to the Great Hall. arrived at the highest city in the world, Litting, Great Hall. Lin En thought silently in his heart and came to the end of the team. At this time, the young wizards of all grades from the 4 major colleges were already sitting around 4 long tables. Thousands of candles were floating above the tables, and stars were twinkling on the velvety black ceiling, making the entire auditorium more beautiful and magnificent. Professor McGonagall took a few steps forward and placed a pointed wizard hat on a 4-legged stool. The hat was patched and worn for a long time, and it was as dirty as a piece of rags just picked up from the garbage dump. This hat was naturally the sorting hat that determined the belonging of each young wizard. The sorting hat twisted in the auditorium, as if no one was around, and the big crack, that was like a big mouth, made an unpleasant singing sound. The sorting ceremony has begun. Chapter 7 Sorting into Slytherin. This year's defense against the dark arts professor. After the singing ended, Professor McGonagall came forward with a roll of parchment with all the names of the new students. Whoever I call now will wear the sorting hat. Professor McGonagall shouted. Phaeacia. A little girl ran out of the queue and sat down on the 4-cornered stool obediently. Professor McGonagall put the sorting hat on her head. A few seconds later, the sorting hat shouted out, Ravenclaw. The little girl named Phaeacia stood up nervously, and then, with Professor McGonagall's nod, she stumbled to the second table on the left, where everyone was clapping and applauding. That was the long table belonging to Ravenclaw College. After Phaeacia sat down, Professor McGonagall read out the name of the next little wizard. In this way, the sorting ceremony proceeded in an orderly manner. Because the first letter of Lin's surname, Roll, is R, which is later in the alphabet, it took nearly 20 minutes for Professor McGonagall to call his name. Lin Rao. Professor McGonagall said loudly. Lin walked forward, sat on the 4-cornered stool, and let the sorting hat put on his head. Closing his eyes, Lin could hear a subtle voice ringing in his ears. Difficult, very difficult. I can see that you have great courage, which is a courage that most Gryffindors cannot match, and you are very talented. Lin was not surprised to hear the words of the sorting hat. After all, if he had no courage, how could he die in a fire to save a child he didn't know? Exclamation mark. However, according to the meaning of the sorting hat, did it want to arrange himself into Gryffindor? Exclamation mark. You know, the only pure-blood family member assigned to Gryffindor, besides the Weasley family, is probably Sirius Black. But, I can also see that you are loyal enough. You will not betray any friends, and in terms of love, you may be steadfast. The sorting hat continued to speak. This time, it was talking about the Hufflepuff characteristics of Lin En. When Lin En heard the sorting hat's evaluation of his love, he couldn't help but blush and feel ashamed. Please, I have been a single dog for 2 lifetimes. Why is the sorting hat so sure about him in love? I can also see that you seem to have great wisdom. Whether it is learning ability or thinking ability, you are far superior to most Ravenclaws, but this is not your innate ability, but the accumulation of acquired knowledge. This time, the sorting hat talked about the Ravenclaw characteristics of Lin En. Hearing what the sorting hat said, Lin En couldn't help but laugh in his heart. After 16 years of exam-oriented education, his learning ability and other aspects are naturally not comparable to those British little wizards who are full of bad habits. Even Ravenclaw, who has a strong academic atmosphere, is probably not as competitive as he was in his previous life. However, although the sorting hat could tell him about his Ravenclaw traits, he was sure that the sorting hat would not really assign him to Ravenclaw. After all, compared with the traits of other colleges, it was not surprising that he had only acquired talent. In the end, I can see your huge ambition. Maybe you disdain power, but your desire for strength and victory surpasses all the little wizards I have seen today. You will not stick to worldly constraints. In order to achieve your goals, you may do whatever it takes. The words of the sorting hat made Lin En silent. Yes, as the sorting hat said, his desire for victory is indelible. Born in the mountains in his previous life, he always had the desire to get out of the mountains and stand out. He would give up everything he had for an opportunity, and he would also beat his teacher at night and hospitalize him because his teacher helped his relatives to get through the back door. I'm afraid that only those who are born in the quagmire will have the most sincere desire for victory. In this life, Lin En was born into the royal family, one of the 28 holy pureblood families, but the desire in his bones would not be wiped out by a simple reincarnation. Interesting, really interesting. You are the most difficult little wizard I have ever assigned to in the past 10 years. You are brave and kind, but you are unscrupulous, and have extreme desires. You are steadfast and loyal, and you have a smart mind and calm thinking. You are like a collection of contradictions. Where should I assign you? You have almost the characteristics of every college, and you are not inferior to ordinary people. It is difficult for me to assign you to one of them, and ignore the other 3 colleges. The Sorting Hat wavered. It had never seen such a strange little wizard. Slytherin, Lin En said hoarsely. Every characteristic described by the Sorting Hat was a portrayal of his previous life, as if he had repeated that short life again in these short 2.5 minutes. But whether it was his bravery when he jumped into the fire, his persistence during school, or his sincerity in getting along with friends, they were all just a moment in his short life. Only the desire for victory that was in line with the characteristics of Slytherin was the thing that ran through his life. Do you want to go to Slytherin? Okay. After all, you are also a member of the royal family. Since you are ambitious here, I will follow your heart. Perhaps it was because Lin's Slytherin characteristics were indeed more obvious, or perhaps it was because Lin was born in a pureblood family, or perhaps it was really difficult for the Sorting Hat to sort out his college. After learning of Lin's thoughts, the Sorting Hat agreed to his request without hesitation. Slytherin. The Sorting Hat shouted loudly. Opening his eyes, Lin heard the thunderous applause from the Slytherin table, and also saw the surprised eyes of everyone. When Lin sat down at the Slytherin table, a freshman who was sorted into Slytherin before Lin came over and said, "Great, Ro. It took the Sorting Hat 2.5 minutes to sort you out. This is rare. Oh, by the way, my name is Irving Farley, nice to meet you." Lin nodded and said, "Lin Ro, nice to meet you." After that, Lin had no intention of continuing the conversation. He turned his eyes to the teacher's seat. The people sitting in the teacher's seat were all familiar faces to Lin in his previous life, except for the professor of defense against the dark arts. That's Mr. Wallison Green. Lin's pupils dilated slightly. He didn't expect that he had just opened Mr. Green's chocolate frog card on the train, and now he saw Mr. Green in person. At this time, Lin saw the weird light winds out of the corner of his eye. Obviously, the weird light winds were also surprised that the professor of defense against the dark arts this year was Mr. Green, and there seemed to be some excitement in their eyes. Please collect, recommend, reward, and vote for me. Thank you for your support. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 8: The Banquet and the Slytherin Dormitory. Could it be that the reason why the Weird Light Wind's alchemy level was so high later was because they learned alchemy from Mr. Wallison Green this year? Exclamation mark. Lin's expression moved slightly. In that case, could he also learn alchemy from this famous French alchemist? You know, the Philosopher's Stone that allowed Nicolas Flamel and his wife to extend their lives for more than 600 years is also an alchemy product. Although Lin was not interested in extending life, the power of alchemy made him fascinated. After all, the Philosopher's Stone is alchemy, but alchemy is not the Philosopher's Stone. At this time, Mr. Green, no, Professor Green seemed to catch Lin's gaze. He nodded slightly at Lin and showed a kind smile. Seeing this scene, Lin couldn't help but glance at Professor Snape, who had a zombie face next to Professor Green. They are all gloomy men. Why are there so many differences between people? Lin thought so. Soon, the sorting ceremony ended. Hogwarts' headmaster, Albus Dumbledore, stood up. He looked at the little wizards with a big smile on his face, stretched out his arms, and said happily, "Welcome. Welcome everyone to Hogwarts to start a new school year. Before the banquet begins, I want to say a few words. That is, idiot, cribberby, scum, twist. Thank you, everyone." As Professor Dumbledore finished his words, the auditorium burst into applause. Not a word of nonsense. Lin En was immediately moved, which reminded him of the high school graduation ceremony in his previous life. The headmaster had to shake hands with the students one by one to hand out the leather case of the graduation certificate. Thousands of people took turns to hand it out, and Lin En waited for more than 3 hours in the audience. At this time, the plate in front of Lin En was suddenly filled with food: beef, roast chicken, pork chops, lamb chops, sausages, steaks, boiled potatoes, baked potatoes, potato chips, Yorkshire puddings, pea sprouts, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and perhaps because of a certain old bee, there were also mint hard candies and other candies on the plate. Just as Lin En was about to start eating, the ghosts of various colleges suddenly came out. Beside the Slytherin table was a ghost who looked very scary, with dull eyes, a haggard appearance, and silver blood spots on his robe. This was the ghost of Slytherin's college, the Bloody Baron. My goodness, how can people eat like this? Exclamation mark. Lin En was a little helpless, standing next to the dining table covered in blood. It was really hard to eat. Lin En tried hard to ignore the Bloody Baron, and then tried the steak and baked potatoes on the plate. The taste was unexpectedly good. When the little wizards were full, the food on the plate was replaced by some desserts. There were all kinds of ice cream, apple pie, syrup fruit pie, chocolate sponge cake, fried jam donuts, wine-soaked jam pudding, strawberry, jelly and rice pudding and other desserts. Lin En took 2 cups of ice cream and started eating. Finally, the plate became clean again, and the hall returned to its original silence from the noise during the meal. Oh, now that everyone has eaten and drunk enough, I want to say a few more words to everyone. At the beginning of the semester, I want to give you a few points of attention. First year students, please note that no student is allowed to enter the forest area on the school grounds. Students in other grades should also remember this. Professor Dumbledore's shining eyes swept towards the weird light winds. Obviously, the two of them ran to the Forbidden Forest a lot in their first year. In addition, the administrator Mr. Filch also asked me to remind everyone not to perform magic in the corridor during class breaks. Finally, the review of Quidditch players will be held in the second week of this semester. Students who are interested in joining the college representative team, please contact Ms. Hooch. Now, before everyone goes to bed, let's sing the school song together. Professor Dumbledore said loudly with a smile. But Lin found that all the professors, except Professor Dumbledore, froze their smiles after hearing this sentence. Professor Dumbledore waved his wand, and a long golden ribbon twisted like a snake, forming lines of golden words. These words were the school song of Hogwarts. Everyone chooses a tune they like, said Professor Dumbledore. Ready, sing. Under the leadership of Professor Dumbledore, a group of young wizards sang quickly. Some first-year students were a little shy at first, but soon joined in. Hogwarts, 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 Hogwarts. Please teach us knowledge, whether we are bald old men or children with broken knees. Our minds can accept some interesting things. Because now our brains are empty, full of air, dead flies and trivialities. Teach us some valuable knowledge, give us back what we have forgotten. You just need to do your best, and leave the rest to us. We will study hard, until we turn into dung. Everyone sang according to different tunes, which made the whole hall in a state of chaos. No wonder the expressions of other professors were so helpless. Among them, the Weird Light Wind sang with the melody of Funeral March, while Lin sang in a strange way of singing, dancing and rapping, which made Professor Dumbledore a little eager to move. Music, Professor Dumbledore said with tears in his eyes after the song ended, is more charming than anything we do here. It's time to go to bed now. Everyone go back to the dormitory. So, the prefects of each college led their respective first-year students to the direction of the college dormitory, and a group of little carrots followed the prefects, just like an eagle catching chickens. Slytherin's dormitory is at the bottom of the Black Lake. Lin followed the large group downstairs, and came to a stone door hidden in the stone wall. Remember, the password this week is sacred. The prefect said to everyone, and the stone door hidden in the stone wall slowly opened, revealing the common room inside. The Slytherin common room is a low basement, with rough stone walls and ceilings. Round, green glowing lights are chained, and hung from the ceiling. Not far away there is a huge glass, through which Lin can see the view of the Black Lake. This huge glass makes the entire Slytherin common room look like an aquarium. Lin followed the instructions and came to his dormitory. The bed in the Slytherin dormitory is a traditional 4-poster bed with green silk curtains hanging on the bed and silver embroidery on the bedspread. Please collect, recommend, reward, and monthly ticket. Thank you for your support. Chapter 9 The Weir Lightwind's Invitation. In this dormitory, only the 4-poster bed in the northwest corner had the backpack that Lin En had placed in the train compartment, while the other 3 beds were very tidy and without any luggage. This surprised Lin En. From the sorting ceremony just now, I seem to be the last one to enter Slytherin. Could it be that I'm the only one in this dormitory? Lin En thought to himself. A dormitory can accommodate 4 little wizards. If the number of little wizards who were sorted into Slytherin before Lin En happened to be a multiple of 4, then the extra Lin En would naturally be assigned to a new dormitory. In other words, Lin En can have an entire dormitory to himself. As for the remaining 3 beds, it is estimated that they will have to wait until the sorting ceremony next year to be reserved for the 3 new Slytherin freshmen. One night passed quickly. The first class in the morning was Professor McGonagall's Transfiguration class. In order not to be late, Lin En got up early and rushed to the Transfiguration classroom after breakfast. However, the moving stairs in the castle really gave him a big trouble. It took Lin En nearly half an hour to get from the hall to the Transfiguration classroom. Lin En finally understood why Harry and Ron were late for the first class in the original book. If you don't have a little luck and strength, it is possible to spend half a day on these stairs. This Transfiguration class was taught by Gryffindor and Slytherin together. When Lin En came to the classroom, a tabby cat was sitting on the podium. Lin En knew that this tabby cat was Professor McGonagall's animagus form, so he saluted the tabby cat and then sat down. This made Professor McGonagall look at Lin En more. When the class bell rang, the tabby cat suddenly jumped forward and changed back to Professor McGonagall's human form in the air, causing a group of little wizards to exclaim. Professor McGonagall took 2 steps forward. She seemed very satisfied with the reactions of the little wizards. She said, "I'm glad to see you here, and I'm glad that no one is late for our first Transfiguration class. Perhaps some of you have already learned Transfiguration in advance, and some of you know nothing about it. But whether you have learned Transfiguration in advance or not, I must emphasize one thing first. That is the basic law of Transfiguration. GAMP's Basic Transfiguration Law. GAMP's Basic Transfiguration Law tells us that wizards can transform objects or create something. But it is worth mentioning that there are 5 major exceptions, one of which is food. We can't conjure up delicious food out of thin air, but if we know where the food is we can summon it. If we have some food on hand, we can also cast spells to change or increase it. Remember, never try to turn other objects into food. Once a wizard couldn't find food, so he turned a wooden table into bread and ate it. Later he died because the magic to maintain the transfiguration failed with the passage of time, which turned the bread into a wooden table again in his body. Therefore, when people found his body was full of wooden thorns. Transfiguration is the most complicated and dangerous magic you will learn in Hogwarts. No one should act naughty in my class, or I will ask him to leave and never allow him to enter my transfiguration class. Moreover, if this wrong behavior causes casualties to other young wizards, he will even be tried by the Ministry of Magic. Professor McGonagall said very seriously. Everyone fell silent, and they were all frightened by the consequences of what Professor McGonagall said. At this moment, Lin suddenly raised his hand and said, "Professor McGonagall, if a wizard possesses powerful enough magic power to maintain transfiguration until he grows old or dies, then wouldn't the transformed food be able to continue to exist in the form of food without causing any harm to the wizard?" Hearing this, Professor McGonagall shook her head and said, "Lin, you raise a good question. But I want to make one thing clear, that is, the magic power required to maintain transfiguration will gradually increase with the passage of time. As far as I know, no wizard's magic power can support transfiguration for hundreds of years, not even Professor Dumbledore." Lin nodded thoughtfully. It seems that the relationship between the magic power consumed to maintain transfiguration and time is not a direct proportional function, but an exponential function. Professor McGonagall continued. Not only that, the magic power required to maintain transfiguration is also related to the size of the object. If the object is large, the duration will be shorter. On the contrary, if the object is small, the duration will be longer. And what I need you to do in this transfiguration class is to try to transform a match into a needle. Professor McGonagall said, and gave each person a match. Lin took out the wand from his arms and chanted the spell softly. The match gradually changed under the control of transfiguration. First, one end of it became thinner and thinner, and its body gradually glowed with silver light. After completing the external changes, Lin tried to change the texture of the match, turning it from wood to metal. But no matter how Lin used his mind to control the match, he could only make its appearance more like a silver needle, while its interior was still a piece of wood. But even so, Lin's progress was the fastest in this classroom. Professor McGonagall came over and saw the matchstick in front of Lin that had turned into a silver needle. She couldn't help but praise him. Well done. Although it's not completely successful, it's already good to be able to achieve this level for the first time. For your excellent transfiguration, Slytherin gets 2 points. Thank you, Professor. Lin said. During the rest of the transfiguration class, Lin continued to try to change the texture of the matchstick, and finally completed the transformation before the end of the get out of class, turning the matchstick into a silver needle. Undoubtedly, this earned Lin another 2 points for Slytherin. After leaving the transfiguration classroom, Lin walked towards the potions classroom located in the basement of Hogwarts Castle. When passing the Great Hall, Lin met Fred and George. Hey, brother. Fred walked towards Lin and patted him on the shoulder. George said beside him, we didn't expect you to really get into Slytherin. After all, in our opinion, you are not like those little snakes at all. Lin spread his hands and told the truth. The Sorting Hat said that I have the characteristics of the 4 major colleges, but in the end I was sorted into Slytherin. Lin did not tell the 2 that he wanted to go to Slytherin. Fred said regretfully, it's a pity that you can't come to Gryffindor. George said, it doesn't matter, Fred. After all, we are still good friends, right? By the way, Lin, are you free tonight? Fred continued, if you are free, let's meet in the trophy display room after the dinner tonight. We have good things to show you. Please collect, recommend, reward, and monthly ticket. Please ask for everything you can ask for. Thank you all. Chapter 10 Professor Green's Practical Lesson. Lin nodded and said, of course. What good stuff is it? Is it a new toy from Zanko's joke shop? Fred chuckled and said, what new toy? It's more exciting than a toy. George said, see you tonight. After saying goodbye to the Weir Light Winds, Lin came to the underground potion classroom. This is a large classroom located underground, which can accommodate at least 20 young wizards for class. The shelves on the walls of the classroom are filled with various glass jars, which contain animal specimens soaked in solutions. There is also a magic material storage cabinet in the classroom, which stores various raw materials that students of all grades may need when making potions. The environment of the potion class is much colder than other classrooms in the castle. I don't know if it's because of the dim lights here, or because of the creepy animal specimens on the shelves. Bang! Suddenly, the potion classroom was suddenly opened, and Professor Snape, dressed in a black robe, strode in like a blower. You are here to learn the precise science and strict craft of potion making. Professor Snape began to speak. His voice was almost slightly higher than a whisper, but everyone heard every word he said. Since there is no foolish waving of wands here, many of you will not believe that this is magic. I don't expect you to truly appreciate the beauty of the simmering crucible with white smoke and bursts of fragrance. You will not truly understand the magical power of the liquid flowing into people's veins, which makes people excited and confused. However, for the very few smart people, I can teach you how to confuse your mind and how to confuse your senses. I will teach you how to improve your reputation, brew glory, and even prevent death. But there must be one thing, that is, you are not the kind of fools I often encounter. Professor Snape said, while crossing his arms across his chest, like a big bat. At this time, the whole classroom was silent, and almost everyone was shocked by what Snape said. Lin, who was sitting at the back, was very excited. After all, this was another famous scene. It was a pity that Lin would be a sophomore next year, otherwise he wanted to see the famous scene where Professor Snape asked Harry 3 questions in a row. The potion class went smoothly. Professor Snape divided the young wizards into 2 groups and instructed them to mix and prepare a simple potion for treating boils. Lin was in the same group with Irving Farley, who had talked to him at the dinner party yesterday. "I'm responsible for handling the materials, and you will make the potion. How about it?" Irving asked. Lin nodded in agreement, so Irving quickly weighed the dried nettles, crushed the snake's fangs, and handed the processed materials to Lin one by one. Lin put the materials into the crucible one by one and boiled them. He had previewed the potion textbook in advance. Although he had not practiced it, his experience in chemistry class in his previous life made him not as easy to make mistakes as other young wizards. Soon, the potion was boiled, and they were the first group to complete the potion in the classroom. Snape came over, pinched a drop of liquid medicine with his finger, put it in front of his nose and sniffed it. "It's an ordinary potion, nothing special. However, because you finished the potion the fastest and didn't make any mistakes, Slytherin gets 5 points." Professor Snape said lightly. After the potion class, it was lunchtime, and Lin and the others only had one class in the afternoon, which was Defense Against the Dark Arts. Defense Against the Dark Arts Professor Wallace and Green came to the classroom on time. Just like Wallace and Green in the Chocolate Frog card, this Professor Green was a very serious looking man, and deep in his eyes, there seemed to be a barely perceptible gloom, which might be caused by his past experiences. "Please put down your textbooks. You don't need to use textbooks in my class. Today we are going to learn the general methods of dealing with some dark magic creatures." Professor Green glanced around the classroom and spoke slowly. "Remember, you are wizards, and your wand is your best tool to solve most problems. Maybe your textbooks think that you are only in the 1st grade and don't need to learn those self-defense magics, but this is my class, and I don't accept the advice of your textbooks," Professor Green said, picking up a cage covered with red cloth from behind. Professor Green opened the cage, and inside the cage was a seemingly petrified giant spider larvae, which was obviously captured by Professor Green from the Forbidden Forest. Full body binding spell. This is a spell that can effectively remove the threat of the opponent. Whether it is a dark magic creature or a dark wizard, it can be controlled by the full body binding spell. This is one of the spells that I think is most suitable for you to learn. The spell of the full body binding spell is total petrification. The effect after casting is to make the arms and legs of the target of the spell stick together, and the whole body becomes stiff. "Stop the spell," Professor Green said, and then lifted the spell of the giant spider larvae in the cage. "Watch my demonstration. All of you will be petrified." Professor Green reminded the young wizards, and then waved the black wand in his hand gracefully. A white-gray light burst out from the top of the wand and hit the 8-eyed giant spider larva in the cage with lightning speed. The 8-eyed giant spider had just lifted the spell, and had not yet recovered, when it was hit by the spell again. The 8 legs of the 8-eyed giant spider instantly pressed together, and then the whole body became stiff, and fell into the cage. After completing the demonstration, Professor Green took out more than 20 cages from his back again, each of which contained a lively 8-eyed giant spider larva. "Your task today is to successfully release a full body binding spell. As long as you can petrify the 8-eyed giant spider in front of you, it will be considered a success. The first one to successfully release the spell can get 10 points of the school." Professor Green distributed these cages, and said to the young wizards. Hearing Professor Green's words, all the young wizards were a little excited, especially the little lions from Gryffindor next door. They are all ready to fight. This is a full 10 points for the house. Even the house points that Lin En got in Transfiguration and Potions combined are only 9 points, and in this Defense Against the Dark Arts class, you only need to release a spell once to get 10 points for the house. How can this not make these little wizards excited? Exclamation mark. Not only the little lions next door, but also the little snakes in Slytherin have lights in their eyes. They love honor and naturally will not miss this opportunity to get extra points. Please give a good review. Thank you. Chapter 11 Seeking Advice. The little lions and snakes kept waving their wands and chanting spells, trying to petrify the 8-eyed giant spider in front of them. However, most of these little lions and snakes were exposed to this kind of magic for the first time, and only a few of them could cast magic. Moreover, the 8-eyed giant spider itself had a certain magic resistance, and the weak full body binding spell could not petrify it at all. The sound of chanting spells continued to be heard in the defense against the dark arts classroom, but the grey-white light that symbolized the petrification of all was very few, and these grey-white lights were all extinguished after hitting the 8-eyed giant spider without any response. Lin En was also trying to cast a spell. When he was still in the roll castle, he had already practiced the full body binding spell. Although he had become a little rusty in the past 2 months, he could still find the feeling of casting spells. After practicing a few more times, petrify all, Lin En waved his wand again, and this time, a thicker grey-white light burst out, binding the 8-eyed giant spider in front of him in place. Although Lin En was not much stronger than his peers in casting magic other than the fire spell, his long-term practice of the fire spell made his magic more active, which made his magic power grow faster than his peers. The power of the full body binding spell cast by the more powerful magic power would naturally be more powerful. Very good. A perfect full body binding spell. Mr. Owl, because you were the first to successfully cast the spell, Slytherin will get 10 points. Professor Green saw the 8-eyed giant spider larvae in front of Lin En and nodded with satisfaction. In his expectation, it was enough for these young wizards to cast the full body binding spell within 3 classes, and Lin En, who had already cast the spell before the first class was halfway through, made him feel very surprised. When this defense against the dark arts class was about to end, Irving Farley also successfully released the full body binding spell. Although the power was not as strong as Lin En's, it was considered to have successfully controlled the 8-eyed giant spider larvae. This gave Slytherin another 2 points. After class, Lin En was not in a hurry to leave. Mr. O, do you have any more questions? Professor Green noticed that Lin En was still sitting in his seat, so he asked. Lin En scratched his head hesitantly and made a request. Professor, I saw you on the card of the chocolate frog and know that you are an alchemist. Although it is a bit presumptuous, I wonder if I can learn alchemy from you? Professor Green's attainments in alchemy are unquestionable. If Lin En really wants to learn alchemy, then Professor Green would be a good choice. Hearing this, Professor Green was stunned and asked, you want to learn alchemy? But doesn't Hogwarts have an alchemy course? Professor Green is French. He was invited by Dumbledore to join Hogwarts as a professor of defense against the dark arts this year, so he is not familiar with the other course arrangements of Hogwarts. Lin explained. Professor, the alchemy class at Hogwarts is an elective course that can only be chosen in the 6th grade, and even the ancient runes class is an elective course that can only be chosen in the 3rd grade. This place is not like the Beauxbatons School of Witchcraft and Wizardry in France. Hogwarts does not attach much importance to alchemy. I see, Professor Green suddenly realized. Have you ever taught yourself alchemy or ancient runes? Lin said. To be honest, I only came into contact with ancient runes yesterday. I taught myself for a while on the Hogwarts Express, and now I can remember a dozen simple rune words. There was a flash of amazement in Professor Green's eyes. Learning runes is not easy. It is not easy to remember a dozen rune words in less than a day. Professor Green hesitated for a moment, then said, if you are willing, come to my office on Saturday at noon. I will provide you with a list of books that can be used to learn alchemy and give you some guidance. Lin En was overjoyed, and he hurriedly thanked him. Thank you, Professor Green. Professor Green waved his hand and added, by the way, if you want to learn more advanced alchemy in the future, I suggest you work harder on fire control spells such as the flame spell, because some alchemical processes require a relatively high ambient temperature. Hearing this, Lin En's expression changed slightly. He gently waved his wand, and with a beautiful silent spell, a ball of fire appeared out of thin air, jumping in the air, and constantly changing into various shapes according to Lin En's will. Seeing this scene, even Professor Green, who had seen the world, could not sit still. Silent spell. Are you sure you are just a freshman? Professor Green said in disbelief. You know, even Professor Green himself was only able to cast spells silently when he was in his 30s, and Lin En's control over fire was so strong that he could already rival him when he invented the forbidden magic stone. Lin En smiled and said, "Professor, controlling fire is a special talent of mine. If this ability can help me learn alchemy, it would be great." Professor Green nodded slightly, staring at Lin En with burning eyes, and said, "Before you see me on Saturday, remember all the words in ancient magic rune simple introduction. Can you do it?" Lin En thought about it and agreed. Although ancient magic rune simple introduction is a whole textbook, it contains only about 100 rune words. Lin En has worked hard these days, and he can still do it just by memorizing them. "Okay, that's it. You go back first." Professor Green waved his hand and said. Lin En thanked Professor Green again, and then left the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom. After Lin En left the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, Professor Green stood still. His expression was uncertain, and the gloom in his eyes became more and more intense. He looked in the direction where Lin En left, and whispered to himself, "Such a talented student may be the compensation given to me by fate. If he can grow up, perhaps he can do that for me." On the other side, Lin En returned to his dormitory. He had the entire dormitory to himself, so that he could avoid being influenced by his roommates. He took out the ancient magic rune simple introduction borrowed from the Weir Light Winds, and soon entered a state of immersive learning. Lin En's interest in alchemy is not a whim. Alchemy is a long-term investment and high-return career. Even if Lin En does not engage in this career in the future, alchemy itself as a manifestation of ability is enough to make Lin En determined to learn it. Ask for a good review. Thank you. Chapter 12. Marauder's Map. Soon, it was time for the dinner again. The food for the dinner on weekdays was naturally not as rich as the dinner at the beginning of the school term, but even so, the food on the plates was enough to make all the little wizards full and satisfied. After the dinner, Lin En came to the trophy display room on the 4th floor as promised. Surprisingly, Fred and George seemed to have been waiting here for a long time. The two sat on the floor with a dung bomb placed on the ground in the middle. They seemed to be discussing something. Seeing Lin En coming, the two put away the dung bombs, patted their buttocks and stood up. "Finally here, Lin En. Come here and show you our big treasure," George said with a smile, gently closing the door of the trophy display room. Fred exaggeratedly pulled out a large square parchment from his wizard robe. The parchment seemed to be worn out so badly that nothing could be seen on it. Anyone who saw this parchment would probably think it was just an ordinary piece of garbage that no one wanted. But Lin was different. He was familiar with the original book and naturally knew that this parchment was the legendary Marauder's Map. "What is this? I can feel the fluctuations of magic on this parchment. It doesn't seem to be an ordinary parchment," Lin asked knowingly. "You have a good eye. This is the secret of our success." George stroked the parchment lovingly, as if he was stroking his girlfriend. Fred said, "This is a secret weapon to break into Hogwarts. It allows us to master many secret passages that even Filch doesn't know about, and it allows us not to be caught when we are playing pranks." Lin shrugged and motioned for the two to show it. George pulled out his wand, tapped the parchment lightly, and said, "I solemnly swear that I will do no good." In an instant, thin ink lines spread out like spider webs from the place where George's wand tip touched, connecting with each other, crisscrossing, and extending to every corner of the parchment. Then, words appeared on the parchment in large green cursive characters. "Mooney, Wormtail, Padfoot and Prongs, gentlemen who provide help to magic prank makers, grandly present the Marauder's Map." This map depicts all the details of Hogwarts Castle and the grounds, but the most unusual thing is that there are many small black dots moving on the map, each with a name, marked in very small font. On this Marauder's Map, Lin can see Professor Snape walking around in the potions classroom, seemingly taking potion materials. Professor Green is motionless in the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office, perhaps conducting some alchemical experiment. Professor Dumbledore takes 2 steps in the headmaster's office, and then disappears without a trace. Lin guessed that he left through the flame of the Phoenix Forks. In addition to Hogwarts Castle, Lin can also see some strange passages, and the common point of these passages is that they all lead to Hogsmeade. There are 7 passages leading to Hogsmeade, and Filch knows these 4. Fred pointed to the passages on the Marauder's Map. "I believe the other 3 are only known to the 2 of us." "Oh no, the 3 of us. Try not to use the one behind the mirror on the 5th floor. That passage looks a bit loose. I bet it will collapse in less than 5 years." And this one, the entrance is at the root of the Homping Willow. I guess no one has ever used it. As for the remaining one, the entrance is at the hunchback of the one-eyed old woman outside the classroom. Through it, you can go directly to the cellar of Honeydukes. This is the one we use most often. Fred introduced the secret passages of Hogwarts to Lin. Lin nodded slightly. He planned to tell the Weirlight twins about the secret passage of the Homping Willow leading to the Shrieking Shack next time. As for now, he had just got the Marauder's map. He had no reason to know about it. Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs, George exclaimed, tapping the title on the map. Thanks to them. Noble people, working tirelessly to help a new generation of delinquent students, Fred said solemnly. Yes, George agreed briskly. Don't forget to erase it after use, otherwise everyone can see it, Fred warned. Just tap it again and say, mischief over. It will become a blank sheet of paper again. As George spoke, he tapped the Marauder's map with his wand again, erasing the writing on the Marauder's map. Fred smiled and said to Lin, if you need the Marauder's map, you can always ask for it. Of course, we can also use it to sneak out and play together. By the way, we plan to go to Zanko's joke shop in Hogsmeade through the secret passage this Saturday. Do you want to join us? After the 3rd grade, the little wizards of Hogwarts can go to Hogsmeade every weekend with the signature of their guardians, but the Weirlight twins are only in the 2nd grade this year and cannot go to Hogsmeade through formal channels, so the secret passage recorded in the Marauder's map has become their way to go to Hogsmeade. Lin shook his head and said, I have an appointment with Professor Green at noon this Saturday. He is willing to give me some guidance on alchemy. If you don't mind, I can also teach you the alchemy knowledge I have learned. Hearing this, both of them were a little surprised. They didn't expect Lin to have already taken the path of Professor Green. Cool. The famous French alchemist personally guides. It really deserves to be Lin. You are awesome. I give you a thumbs up. Fred and George applauded at the same time. Fred said, in that case, let's go to Hogsmeade together on Sunday. Lin, don't forget to bring us some alchemy knowledge. Lin smiled and nodded. Well, dogs are itch, bark at each other. Although Lin's words made the two of them a little confused, they knew what Lin meant, so they laughed heartily. By the way, I may need to borrow your alchemy book for a while. Please tell that Ravenclaw Sr. Lin said. After all, the book in his hand was borrowed by the Weirlight twins from others, and he was embarrassed to take it with a clear conscience. Fred and George looked at each other, and then George said, don't worry about that. After yesterday's dinner, the Ravenclaw Sr. came to us and said that he would give us the books directly. So you can read these books, and we will borrow another one. The Ravenclaw Sr. was already in the 6th grade, and the Ancient Runes textbooks for the 3rd grade had naturally been eliminated long ago. He had no brothers or sisters at home, so these books had no room for recycling. So the Ravenclaw Sr. thought that instead of wasting these books, it would be better to give them to the Weirlight twins as a favor. Please collect it. It would be even better if you can give a good review. In addition, please recommend, reward and monthly votes. Chapter 13 Basic Rules and 2 Taboos. Time passed quickly, and it was Saturday in a blink of an eye. After lunch, Lin En came to the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office as scheduled. He held a copy of Ancient Magic Rune's Simple Introduction in his left hand, and knocked on the office door with his right hand. You are quite punctual. Come in. Professor Green opened the office door and let Lin En in. Lin En walked into the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office and looked around with some curiosity. I saw that the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office was divided into 3 areas under the arrangement of Professor Green. The outermost area was a desk sandwiched between 2 bookshelves. This seemed to be the place where Professor Green corrected students' homework and prepared lesson plans. Going further in, there were dozens of cages covered with red cloth stacked together. Lin En guessed that those were the teaching materials prepared by Professor Green, just like the 8-eyed giant spider larvae on Monday, and these teaching materials were probably caught by Professor Green from the Forbidden Forest. As for the innermost part of the office, there were a large number of alchemical equipment, with countless metallic lusters flashing. Lin En also saw a group of lines flashing red light on a prism-shaped device, which was constantly spraying flames upwards. Have you remembered the Ancient Magic Rune Simple Introduction that I asked you to recite on Monday? Professor Green closed the office door, waved his wand, and used transfiguration to conjure up a chair, motioning Lin En to sit down. Lin En sat down obediently and nodded. I remember it all. So Professor Green opened his mouth and asked a few ancient rune words contained in the ancient magic rune simple introduction, and Lin En answered fluently. Very good, take this. Professor Green nodded with satisfaction and handed 2 slips of paper to Lin En. Lin En looked down and saw that one of the slips was densely written with the name of the book, and on the other slip was a lonely signature of Professor Green. These are the books on alchemy that you need to learn by yourself. You can read them in order. As for the last few books, they are only available in the forbidden section of the library. You can borrow them with the signed slip I gave you. Professor Green said lightly, with a gleam in his light blue eyes. He didn't seem to worry that Lin En would use his signed slip for anything else. Okay, Professor Green. Lin En put the slip away. Professor Green turned around, walked across the desk to the deepest part of the office, and stood in front of the prism-shaped alchemy equipment that Lin En had seen before. He turned around and said, "Come here, Lin En." Lin En raised his foot and came to Professor Green's side. In front of the two of them, this group of red lines was still releasing flames. The flames brought a burning breath, but unexpectedly made Lin En feel a little comfortable. You think that these endless flames are all produced by this group of runes, right? Professor Green pointed at this group of runes and asked. Lin En thought about it, nodded and said, "Yes, Professor. There was nothing else on this device except this set of runes." Lin En did think that the flame was produced by this set of runes. Moreover, Lin En also felt the breath of magic from the runes. Hearing this, Professor Green smiled and shook his head. He pulled out his magic wand and gently pointed at the device. The bottom of the prism suddenly cracked, revealing a crystal flashing with fluorescence inside. The crystal continued to shine, and waves of magical power also spread from it. Obviously, this crystal was the real energy source of the flame. This is the product I refined by imitating my teacher's Philosopher's Stone, but it doesn't have the power of turning stones into gold, or granting immortality like the Philosopher's Stone. It can only store our magic power and release it when we need it. Professor Green explained. But after this incident, what did you understand? Lin answered tentatively. Nothing comes out of thin air. If you want to get something, you must pay a price of equal value. Professor Green nodded with satisfaction. Yes, remember, the most basic law of alchemy is equivalent exchange. If you want to get something, you must pay something of equal value. This is a principle that every alchemist must follow during the alchemy process. If you have read books related to alchemy, you should also know this basic law. Alchemy is different from idealistic magic. It is not the other side that you can reach by waving a magic wand. Admittedly, it can't make us get what we want easily, but its value is even greater. It can give you eternity. The gloom in Professor Green's eyes was replaced by a lofty faith-filled light, and his words were full of convincing power. Besides that, there are 2 major taboos in alchemy. You must remember them. Professor Green's expression suddenly became serious. Lin En guessed, time and soul. Hearing this, Professor Green shook his head and said, those are taboos in magic. There are only 2 taboos in alchemy. One is that you can never cross the realm of God, and the other is that human alchemy is prohibited. Lin En nodded thoughtfully. Since the original book repeatedly emphasized the harm of playing with time and soul from many aspects such as the time converter and Voldemort's Horcrux fragments, Lin En subconsciously thought that these 2 were the taboos of alchemy. But Professor Green woke him up. Yes, although magic and alchemy have something in common, they are 2 different systems and cannot be generalized. Moreover, the time converter itself is a kind of alchemical product. If time is really a taboo in alchemy, then there will be no time converter. After telling Lin En the basic rules and 2 taboos of alchemy, Professor Green also talked about many ways to learn ancient runes and the basic knowledge of alchemy. This allowed Lin En to enter the door of alchemy without any obstacles. After learning all the ancient runes, take this on. It can weaken your magic power to 1/10 of the original. After explaining the theoretical knowledge, Professor Green handed Lin En a bracelet. Seeing the crystals inlaid on the bracelet, Lin En couldn't help but exclaimed, "Forbidden magic stone." You know, among Professor Green's achievements recorded on the chocolate frog card, there is the Forbidden Magic Stone, and the effect of the Forbidden Magic Stone known to the public is only to weaken the wizard's magic power by 10%, and that is only the Forbidden Magic Stone the size of the quaffle. However, the Forbidden Magic Stone inlaid on the bracelet is only the size of a fingernail, but it can achieve the effect of suppressing 90% of Lin En's magic power. Could it be that the truth is, just as Lin En analyzed at the beginning, that the Forbidden Stone that Professor Green announced to the public was actually a weakened version, and the reason why the initial version of the Forbidden Stone was not released was to prevent it from being banned due to fear from the major magic ministries? Exclamation mark. Please collect, recommend, reward and vote for the monthly ticket. Please give good comments. Chapter 14, An Attempt at Wandless Casting. Professor Green seemed to see what Lin En was thinking. He nodded slightly and said, as you thought, in order not to be feared by the various magic ministries, I deliberately reduced the alchemical power contained in the Forbidden Magic Stone that was announced to the public. And this is my real masterpiece. As for taking it out today, it is to test the power of your fire magic. The fire magic suppressed by the Forbidden Magic Stone will not burn my office, and I can also restore its own power through data. Lin En understood, and he put on the Forbidden Magic bracelet handed to him by Professor Green. A suppressed breath came, and Lin En suddenly felt a little breathless. He could feel that the speed of the flow of magic in his body slowed down significantly, and his own speed of casting magic seemed to become slower. This is because there has been magic flowing in your body for a long time, so the sudden power of suppressing magic will cause your body to feel uncomfortable instinctively. Take a deep breath and try your best to let your body adapt to it, Professor Green said. Lin En did what Professor Green said and soon relieved the discomfort. Lin En waved his wand, and a flame burned between the two of them. Just as Professor Green described, this magic forbidden bracelet suppressed 90% of Lin En's ability to control magic. Assuming that the maximum diameter of the flame cast by Lin En could reach 10 meters, he could only release a flame with a diameter of 1 meter at most. Moreover, the decline in his control over the flame made him no longer able to control the changes of the flame at will. You don't need to deliberately control the shape of the flame. You just need to output magic power as much as possible to make the flame reach its maximum power, Professor Green said to Lin En. What he wanted to test was the maximum power of the flame magic cast by Lin En, not Lin En's control over the flame. So Lin En stopped controlling the changes of the flame and tried his best to make the power of the flame stronger. Soon, Lin En's flame spell had reached its limit. Lin En had a hunch that, if he continued to strengthen its power, the flame would immediately go out of control. Okay, stop. Professor Green felt that it was almost done, so he asked Lin En to retract the flame and took off the magic forbidden bracelet from Lin En's wrist and put it away. Then, Professor Green picked up a camera-like alchemical product from a table not far away. This alchemical product kept flashing when Lin En released the fire spell. The data collection is almost done. Let me see the original power of your fire spell, Professor Green said, while quickly tapping on this alchemical product. A light curtain was projected from the position of the lens of this alchemical product that looked like a camera, hitting the ground, showing the outline of Lin En's body. In addition, a series of ancient runic symbols appeared one after another next to this body model. With Lin En's current vocabulary of ancient runic words, he could only barely distinguish words such as fire, magic power, and level from them. This is an alchemical product made by my teacher that can evaluate magical abilities. It is called the Magic Energy Evaluator. According to the data analysis provided by the Magic Energy Evaluator, your current level of fire spell is equivalent to that of an aura, Professor Green said, tapped on the Magic Energy Evaluator a few times, and retracted the projected light curtain. Professor Green looked at Lin En and said, although the magic power in your body is limited, in terms of the control of the fire spell, you are no weaker than the auras of the Ministry of Magic. I think you can start to try the wandless casting of the fire spell. Under normal circumstances, a wizard needs to use a wand to cast magic smoothly, because without a wand to guide the magic power, it is difficult for the wizard to control the flow of magic power in the body. Specifically, it is like charging with a data cable and wireless charging. Therefore, wandless casting is an extremely inefficient means of casting. Without the assistance of the wand, the wizard needs to consume more magic power to release the same level of magic. This requires the magic power reserve in the wizard's body, and the magic power reserve in the wizard's body will become stable and reach its peak after adulthood. This is why, no matter how talented the wizard is, he has to control wandless casting after adulthood. But Lin En has a special talent in fire control, which allows him to convert magic power into fire more efficiently, which also gives him the opportunity to try wandless casting. At this time, someone may ask, since wandless casting is inefficient, why are there so many people keen to try wandless casting? You know, a wizard has many ways to take away the opponent's wand. The disarming spell is the most typical way to take away the opponent's wand. After losing the wand, the wizard always has to have a way to protect himself. At this time, wandless casting becomes a life-saving straw for a wizard who has lost his wand. Moreover, long-term wandless casting can train the wizard's ability to control the magic power in his body and feed back the casting ability when using the wand, making it more powerful when using the wand to cast. Wandless casting? Professor, how should I do it? Lin En asked. Professor Green said, I think, when you were trying to cast the spell silently, you should have felt the trajectory of the magic power in your body when the fire spell was cast. Lin nodded and said, indeed, I can feel that the magic power is flowing along a certain trajectory and finally flows to the wand and turns into the form of flame. It's just that I find it difficult to grasp this trajectory. Although I have tried to actively control the flow of magic power when casting silently, most of my magic power still flows passively when I recite the spell silently. My efforts are just to speed up the efficiency of its flow. Professor Green continued, you are heading in the right direction. Next, you just need to continue to explore the trajectory of this magic power while casting silently, and then try to change the final direction of the magic power from your wand to your body. In this way, you will be able to cast spells normally, even if you lose the wand. If it was someone else, even if the wandless spell was really successful, the power of the flame would certainly be much smaller. But you are different. Your special affinity for fire allows you to control the fire well, even if it leaves your body. This is your advantage. Professor Green said firmly. So, Lin En began to feel the flow trajectory of the magic power in his body when he released the fire spell. An afternoon passed quickly. With the help of Professor Green, Lin En barely explored the fixed flow trajectory of the magic power. However, when he put down the wand and tried to change the final direction of the magic power from flowing to the wand to flowing to the palm, the magic power in his body seemed to stagnate and no longer obeyed his command. Please collect, recommend, reward and monthly ticket. Please give good comments. Thank you for your support. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 15 One-Eyed Witch Passage. Okay, let's stop here. To be honest, I'm already surprised that you can figure out the flow of magic today. You can practice slowly for the rest when you go back. Remember, nothing can be achieved overnight. Professor Green patted Lin's shoulder and signaled Lin to stop. His eyes were full of appreciation for Lin. Professor Green said, when you go back, memorize the ancient runes recorded in the first 3 books on the list as soon as possible, and then I will take you to the threshold of alchemy in advance. Lin bowed to Professor Green. Okay, thank you Professor. After leaving the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office, Lin took the list of books and headed towards the library. On the way, Lin met Fred and George. He returned the books he had borrowed before to the 2 of them, so that they didn't have to borrow new ones. Brother, what are you doing? Fred was a little confused. Lin showed the list of books he got from Professor Green and said, the professor asked me to read the books on this list. I will copy a copy of this list for you, as well as my alchemy notes for this afternoon. Hearing this, Fred and George looked at each other, and they both saw excitement in each other's eyes. George quickly stepped forward and hugged Lin's neck, and Fred also leaned over with his arm around Lin's shoulder. You are worthy of being a good brother. He is really, I'm crying. Then our alchemy knowledge, I will leave it to our dear Lin. The two spoke in unison, and their words all showed their joy. Lin agreed with the two to go to Hogsmeade through the secret passage the next day. After separating from the Light Winds, Lin went to the library of Hogwarts and borrowed 5 books at once. According to Professor Green's requirements, he only needed to remember the knowledge points of the first 3 books to truly enter the threshold of alchemy, and the last 2 books would help him familiarize himself with and practice basic alchemy. Books in the magic world are generally full of nonsense, and the truly useful content only accounts for less than 1/10 of the whole book. Even though the books that Lin En borrowed have been carefully selected by Professor Green, the knowledge that can help Lin En in a book is only about 1/3 at most. This is why most of the successive professors of the Defense Against the Dark Arts class at Hogwarts choose to give students practical classes, or at least combine textbooks with practice. Even the idiot Gilderoy Lockhart, when he was not clear about his self-awareness at the beginning, his first class was a practical class. Of course, a certain pink waist is another matter. This kind of nonsense textbooks and books are also one of the reasons why young wizards generally have poor grades. However, Lin En, who has studied high school Chinese, naturally has a certain ability to extract information, and more than 10 years of exam-oriented education has made his efficiency in learning far superior to that of ordinary people. In just one day, Lin En finished reading 1/3 of the first book. At this moment, it is time for Lin En and the Light Winds to go to Hogsmeade as agreed. Lin put down the book in his hand, hung a canvas bag with a traceless stretch spell on his waist, and then walked out of the Slytherin common room quickly and headed for the 4th floor. Soon, Lin came to the One-Eyed Witch on the 4th floor. He saw Fred and George behind the One-Eyed Witch. "Come on." George called Lin over, then took out his wand and knocked on the One-Eyed Witch, separate left and right. The hunchback of the One-Eyed Witch statue opened, and the big hole in it could accommodate a thin person. "I saw that Filch is still in the broom room on the 1st floor. Let's go." George quickly glanced at the Marauder's map in his hand, headed forward into the hole, and walked forward. Lin and Fred followed closely behind. After entering the hole, Fred turned around and cast a spell to restore the hole to its original state. The 3 of them moved forward in the secret passage and soon came across a stone slide. They slid down the stone slide for a long time and then fell to the cold and wet mud at the bottom. It was pitch black around them. Nothing could be seen. Lumus. Lumus. Fred and George cast the luminous charm at the same time, and 2 balls of light lit up at the top of their wands. Lin waved his wand and released a ball of fire floating beside him. The red flame shone brightly, instantly overshadowing the luminous charm cast by the Light Winds. "Please, you make us look useless," Fred complained in a low voice, and together with George, he extinguished the luminous charm at the top of the wand. Lin smiled and said, "The light of the luminous charm appears at the top of the wand, blocking the outlet for the magic power to leak out, which makes it impossible for us to cast other spells at the same time. If we encounter danger, we have to extinguish the luminous charm first. The flame summoned by the fire charm is an independent light source, which allows us to cast other magic while casting the fire charm, which is much safer." Although Lin knew that the end of this secret passage was Honeyduk's cellar, his cautious character still made him leave enough retreat for himself at any time. "Cool. You still know more." The 2 raised their thumbs. Lin observed the surroundings. They were in a narrow and short dirt passage. The passage ahead was winding, and the ground was uneven. It was more like a giant rabbit hole than a tunnel. The 3 of them walked slowly. After an unknown amount of time, they came to a trapdoor. On the other side of the trapdoor was a cellar filled with crates and other wooden boxes. The 3 of them quickly slipped out of the cellar and walked down the stairs to Honeyduk's shop. Every Sunday, Honeyduk's would be filled with countless young wizards from Hogwarts, and today would be no exception. Honeyduk's shop was not very big. In such a crowded situation, Lin and the other 2 who suddenly appeared in the shop would not attract attention. The 3 of them blended into the crowd and came to the door of Honeyduk's. "Finally out." "Yeah, I was suffocating, especially that old lady who smelled of perfume." Fred and George panted heavily. Lin smiled and said, "Do you want anything to eat? I'll treat you." Fred and George looked at each other and said in unison, "You can do whatever you want. We don't want to go in anyway." Hearing this, Lin spread his hands helplessly and returned to Honeydukes alone. As he walked deeper into Honeydukes, he looked at the delicacies on the shelves. It will be recommended the day after tomorrow. Please give me a good review. Chapter 16 The Past That Cannot Be Recalled. Rows of shelves were filled with delicious and juicy candies, including large pieces of creamy yellow almond candies, shiny pink coconut ice cream, honey-colored toffee, hundreds of neatly arranged chocolates, a large bucket of Bibi multi-flavor beans, and a large bucket of Sizzy Bee candies. Against the other wall were some special effect candies, such as the blowing treasure super bubble gum that could fill the room with bluebell colored bubbles that wouldn't burst for days, the strange, crispy, and fragile hairy teeth mint candies, the small, black pepper urchins that would spit fire after being eaten, the ice mouths that could make the eater's teeth squeak, the toad-shaped mint ice cream that would jump in the stomach, the thin crispy feather candies made of sugar threads, and the exploding soft candies. Of course, Lin couldn't really appreciate these so-called special effect candies. Perhaps only the weird light winds who love to play pranks would like these special effect candies. After all, they later invented a lot of such prank products. Thinking of this, Lin took 2 of each of these special effects candies and planned to buy them for the weird light winds. After picking some snacks for himself, Lin quickly checked out and left Honeydukes to meet up with the weird light winds. Here, these are for you. Lin handed the big bag of special effects candies to Fred and George. Fred and George were very surprised to receive this big bag of special effects candies. These special effects candies are very good reference materials for researching prank products. They originally planned to go to Zanko's joke shop to buy some prank products as reference materials for their research of their own prank products. The reason why they did not come to Honeydukes to buy special effects candies, but went to Zanko's joke shop instead, was because Zanko's joke shop itself was a store specializing in joke products, but more because they could not afford to buy too many snacks from Honeydukes. This can be seen from the fact that they could only eat sandwiches made by Mrs. Wheelie on the train, and were reluctant to buy snacks. After learning the two's intention to come to Hogsmeade, Lin asked, "Are you still going to Zanko's joke shop?" Fred nodded and said, "Of course. Even if we don't buy anything else, we have to buy some dung bombs. Our recent goal is to improve the power of dung bombs, but we have run out of dung bombs." So Lin put the snacks of the 3 people into the canvas bag with the traceless extension spell, and then went to Zanko's joke shop again. Hogsmeade is indeed the largest wizard village in the British wizarding world. The flow of people is no less than the main streets in the muggle world. The wizards coming and going are carrying the things they just bought and walking with their companions. Zanko's joke shop is not far from Honeydukes. It only took a while for the 3 to reach their destination. The weird light winds used their long cherished pocket money to buy a batch of dung bombs, and Lin bought a shorthand quill when passing by the Winrenju quill pen store. "How about going to the 3 broomsticks for a drink?" Fred suggested. Lin and George agreed. The interior of the 3 broomsticks was very neat, and the bar was spacious, bright, clean and warm. It was much better than the leaky cauldron that Lin had been to before. The owner of the 3 broomsticks was Ms. Rosmerta, who looked graceful and charming. Many young wizards liked her. In the original book, Ron Weasley even had a crush on Ms. Rosmerta for a long time in his 6th grade. "Good afternoon, Ms. Rosmerta. 3 butterbeers." Fred greeted Ms. Rosmerta happily. Ms. Rosmerta looked at Lin and the other 2 and smiled. "Fred, George, I didn't expect you to bring a first-year student here. What's the name of this little wizard from Slytherin?" Lin shook hands with Ms. Rosmerta. "Lin Rowell. Nice to meet you, ma'am." After getting to know Ms. Rosmerta asked them to find a seat. The 3 of them came to the bar and sat down near the window and the fireplace. After a few minutes, 3 cups of hot butterbeer with foam were served. Cheers. Lin En and the other 2 raised their glasses at the same time and took a big sip. Lin En felt that this butterbeer was not real wine, but sweet. After drinking it, he felt that every inch of his body was warmed up. Just as Lin En and the other 2 finished drinking butterbeer and were about to get up and leave, George suddenly called out to the 2 of them, "Wait, look. That's Professor Green." Following George's gaze, Lin En found that Professor Green, whom he had just met yesterday, walked into the bar, but he was completely different from him in Hogwarts. At this time, he looked very gloomy, and his light blue eyes were full of gloom. 5 glasses of fire whiskey, Professor Green said lightly, and he found a place in the deepest part of the bar and sat down. After the strong liquor was served on the table, Professor Green drank it in big gulps. Lin En could see that his eyes were very wet. It was obvious that Professor Green was not enjoying the wine at this time, but was drinking to relieve his sorrow. At this time, Ms. Rosmerta came to them and saw the puzzled look of Lin En and others. She sighed and said, "Alas, in order to teach you in the best condition, Professor Green has accumulated all his troubles and pains in his heart. I'm afraid that only now can he vent himself freely." Lin En hesitated and asked, "Ms. Rosmerta, Professor Green seems to have a past that he cannot bear to look back on." Ms. Rosmerta said, "Yes, but it is not convenient for me to tell you this. After all, it is Mr. Green's privacy." Lin En was silent for a while and did not ask more questions. Instead, he quietly waited for Professor Green to finish his drink and leave, and then returned to Hogwarts with the Light Winds. The reason why he did not leave directly before was perhaps because he knew that Professor Green did not want his students to see him like this. On the way back, the 3 of them remained silent until they opened the statue of the one-eyed witch again and entered the castle. Professor Green's appearance just now was really terrible. I can't imagine that he, who is so kind in class, would have such a side, George said in a low voice. Fred said, maybe he encountered some problems, but if even Professor Green can't solve the problem, how can we help? Lin patted the 2 on the shoulder and said, don't mention this to anyone. The only way we can help Professor Green is to give him less trouble. Of course, brother. We will keep it rotten in our stomachs, excrete it with feces, and then forget it completely. The Light Winds seemed to have returned to their usual state, and they sang in unison. Please give me some recommendation tickets, rewards, and monthly tickets. Thank you. Chapter 17 Alchemy School, Dual Cultivation of Formations. After parting with the Light Winds, Lin returned to the Slytherin common room to continue studying the 3 ancient rune books. However, no matter how much he wanted to forget what happened in the 3 broomsticks, Professor Green's appearance was still fresh in his memory. It was another Saturday. In these 6 days, Lin had already read all the knowledge points of the first 3 books on the list, and even remembered the general knowledge points of the 4th book on alchemy. Standing outside the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office, Lin felt a little uneasy and excited. You know, a week ago, Professor Green told him clearly that, as long as he could finish reading the first 3 books, he could take him to the threshold of alchemy in advance. The door of the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office was opened. Professor Green looked normal, no different from when he taught everyone Defense Against the Dark Arts on weekdays. He invited Lin into the office. Professor, I have finished reading the first 3 books on the list you gave me, and I have also read the general knowledge of the 4th book. Without waiting for Professor Green to speak, Lin took the initiative to say. Hearing this, Professor Green was a little surprised. Even when he was studying alchemy, it took him 2.5 weeks to learn the knowledge points of these 3 books. What does this alchemical rune mean? Professor Green raised his hand and used his magic wand to draw a combination of ancient runes and alchemical runes in the air and asked Lin En to test it. In the 3rd book on the list, there are special runes that combine some ancient runes and alchemical runes. These are necessary runes for some advanced alchemy. Even alchemists can simply engrave these alchemical runes on alchemical products to make them work. In general, alchemical runes need to be stimulated by some special materials or magic power to play their due role, but these special alchemical runes are different. They can play a role directly. This is why Professor Green said that, as long as Lin En can learn these, he can directly step into the threshold of alchemy. After all, even if Lin En didn't know other alchemical knowledge, he could give these items special abilities by simply engraving these special alchemical runes on some items. This alchemical rune means strengthening, which can strengthen the original effect of magic product to a certain extent, and the degree of strengthening depends on its original magic strength. Lin En just glanced at the alchemical rune in the air and answered quickly. Professor Green sketched out another alchemical rune and asked, what about this alchemical rune? Lin En answered fluently. This alchemical rune means explosion, which can make the object engraved with this alchemical rune explode, but its activation condition is magic power. Professor Green sketched out another alchemical rune that looked like a rectangle. Lin En drew inferences from one example. This alchemical rune means obstruction. It can hinder the flow of magic power. If this alchemical rune is connected with the alchemical rune that means explosion just now, it can form a special rune that delays the explosion. It can make the object engraved with these two runes delay the explosion for a period of time after being injected with magic power. Hearing this, Professor Green nodded with satisfaction. Professor Green said, "Very good. It seems that I don't need to continue to test you. Your thinking is very flexible. Even if you have not systematically studied alchemy, you have guessed some of the fields of alchemy. Next, I will lead you to truly enter the field of alchemy." Lin En looked at Professor Green with expectation. Professor Green said, "Generally speaking, alchemists are divided into two schools. The first is the magic alchemist who focuses on refining all chemical materials and creating all chemical products from scratch. The second is the array alchemist who focuses on engraving all chemical runes and connecting them together to form all chemical arrays and performing secondary enchantments on existing things to make them all chemical products. Among them, the representative alchemical product of the magic alchemist is the Philosopher's Stone of Mr. Nicholas Flamel, while the representative alchemical product of the array alchemist is Hogwarts Castle. The countless defensive arrays of Hogwarts Castle were added to it by generations of array alchemists." After talking about the two schools of alchemists, Professor Green asked, "So, Lin, which school do you plan to join?" Lin En hesitated. The two schools of alchemy expounded by Professor Green were particularly attractive. Whether it was the Philosopher's Stone made by Mr. Nicholas Flamel or the defensive array of Hogwarts Castle that had been made by countless alchemists, they were all very convincing. "Professor, which school of alchemy are you from?" Lin En asked. As the teacher who taught Lin En alchemy, Professor Green's choice was of great reference significance. Hearing this, Professor Green smiled. He patted Lin En on the shoulder and said, "As for me, I'm practicing both formations and magic. As the name suggests, I'm practicing the knowledge of two alchemical schools at the same time. My forbidden magic stone is the product of the combination of the two alchemical schools. It is not only an alchemical product made from various alchemical materials that I have refined, but I have also engraved a large number of alchemical arrays on it to make it more powerful. Of course, if we only talk about the weakened version of the forbidden magic stone that I have announced to the world and is sought after by major magic ministries, that is a product of magical alchemy. After all, there are no alchemical arrays on the weakened version of the forbidden magic stone. However, not everyone can practice both formations and magic like me. After all, the alchemical knowledge of each alchemical school is enough to consume all the energy of an alchemist. Not everyone has enough time, energy and talent to practice alchemy from two different alchemical schools at the same time," Professor Green said, turning his gaze to Lin En. After learning about Professor Green's choice, Lin En said without hesitation, "In that case, Professor Green, I also want to practice both formations. Whether it is time, energy or talent, these are what Lin En has at present. Since he has the ability, why not study both alchemy schools together?" Exclamation mark. Hearing Lin En's choice, Professor Green seemed relieved. He said with satisfaction, "Very good, you are worthy of being my chosen student. Since you have chosen to practice both formations like me, I will teach you as much as possible and let you go further on the road of alchemy. Lin En, are you willing to worship me as your teacher and learn my alchemy?" The apprenticeship mentioned by Professor Green is not the teacher-student relationship of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, but the inheritance of the master. If Lin En agrees, then Lin En will be Professor Green's direct disciple. Zhao Shai and Shang recommended it. Please support everyone. Chapter 18 Obsession and Inheritance. Lin nodded and said, "Professor Green, I would like to be your disciple and learn alchemy from you." Professor Green happily agreed. He took out 3 things from his pocket after casting a traceless stretching spell. They were a metal bracelet, a 1-meter long scepter and a sharp dagger. He handed them to Lin. "Although I'm French, I also know that your British magic world has not been peaceful in recent years. So I plan to give you some alchemical props for self-defense. Just treat it as a gift from me after you become my disciple. I don't need to say much about the first anti-magic bracelet. This scepter is a one-time activated anti-magic scepter. It can burst out the power of the anti-magic stone after you inject magic power into it, suppressing the magic power within a radius of 100 meters, making wizards within the range unable to cast magic like a squib. However, the anti-magic scepter can only suppress the magic power of aura level at most, and its effect on Demon King level wizards is extremely limited. As for the third one, I personally engraved the dagger with the alchemical array of the sharp attribute, which can enable you to have the ability to protect yourself within the anti-magic range. Professor Green introduced. Judging from the brand new magical aura of these three alchemical products, Professor Green should have just made them not long ago. Obviously, Professor Green had the idea of taking Lin En as his apprentice before this class started. Lin En was somewhat touched when he accepted the three gifts and solemnly put them into the canvas bag hanging around his waist. Thank you, teacher. However, the effect of your magic forbidden staff seems to have far exceeded the magic forbidden bracelet. Is it your final work? Lin En first thanked Professor Green and then asked. Professor Green nodded, and his eyes seemed to be a little lonely when he looked at the magic forbidden staff. He only heard him say, yes, I have refined a magic forbidden staff, but it made me make a big mistake. I thought I would never refine a second magic forbidden staff in my life. But now, I have met you, the most talented student I have ever seen. I'm willing to refine a magic forbidden staff again, and I also hope that you can complete that regret for me after you have learned something perfect the magic forbidden staff. Professor Green's tone suddenly became solemn, and he said solemnly, regret? Could it be that, because of something bad, this magic forbidden staff has become a regret for you, teacher? Lin En asked softly. He had a hunch that Professor Green's so-called regret must be related to what Ms. Rosmerta said about Professor Green's past, that he could not bear to look back on. Professor Green lowered his head slightly. He sighed, and the gloom in his light blue eyes deepened. Yes, this is related to an incident that happened to me before. That incident destroyed everything for me. As I said just now, this scepter of magic is imperfect, because its power to suppress magic is limited, and it cannot completely suppress the spell-casting ability of a demon lord level wizard. But when I refined it that year, I did not realize this. At that time, the Dark Lord Gellert Grindelwald was wreaking havoc in the magical world, and I thought my scepter of magic was perfect, and could suppress his power. So, I bought 2 guns from the muggle world, and searched for the traces of the Dark Lord Gellert Grindelwald with my wife, and finally found him. I activated the power of the scepter of magic, but there was pain in Professor Green's eyes. The scepter completely sealed off my entire magic, but it failed to completely seal off the magic power of that demon level wizard. Grindelwald, who has the ability to cast spells, is far from being dealt with by small muggle guns. This self-binding behavior has made us lose the ability to resist. I thought I would stay there forever, but she, my wife, used an ancient emotional magic, at the cost of her own life, to temporarily break the restrictions of the scepter, and took me away from there. Because of my arrogance and recklessness, I lost her forever. Professor Green scratched his hair in pain, as if he had returned to that battlefield. So, completely perfecting the scepter, so that it can truly seal off all magic, and achieve equality for all beings, has become my ultimate obsession. I know she can't come back, but I don't want her sacrifice to be in vain. If the scepter can be perfected and given real value, then even if I die, I'm willing. Professor Green screamed, his eyes flashing with the madness that belongs only to scholars. But I'm old, and I'd lost the ability to make progress, so my student, you, Lin, will complete my final work for me. Lin, will you do your best to perfect this work in the future? Professor Green stared at Lin. Looking at Professor Green, who seemed to be in a frenzy, Lin remembered everything he saw at the 3 broomsticks last Sunday. He nodded and said, I'm willing, teacher. I will do my best. I promise. Looking at Lin's still young face, Professor Green sighed and said, I'm sorry, Lin, I made you laugh today. I don't know if it's appropriate for you to accept this responsibility so early, but I have no choice. Lin interrupted Professor Green and said, teacher, this is my choice. Besides, I'm indeed interested in the research of the forbidden magic stone. Professor Green was silent. He glanced at Lin, then stood up and waved his wand twice. A silent spell of cleansing was thrown on him, making Professor Green's face neat again. A book not far away was transformed into a blackboard under the effect of transfiguration, and lines appeared on the blackboard, eventually forming a pattern that looked like a circuit diagram. Although you chose to practice both array and magic, the magic alchemy requires a higher level of magic power from the wizard. I will start teaching you next year, and now, I will teach you to learn array alchemy. Professor Green said, array alchemy requires the alchemist to combine scattered alchemical runes with magic power to form a specific alchemical array. And this alchemical array is actually similar to the circuit diagram of muggles. Oh, sorry, I forgot that you probably don't know what a circuit diagram is. After all, not everyone is like me, who will go to a muggle university to study for 2.5 years. Professor Green seemed to remember something, and he smiled self-deprecatingly. Although he was trying to learn more knowledge, according to the generally conservative concept of the wizarding world, it was a shame for wizards and muggles to live together. Hearing this, Lin En shook his head and interrupted. No, teacher, I know what a circuit diagram is. Then, in Professor Green's rather surprised look, Lin En pointed to the circuit diagram on the blackboard and said, this is a schematic diagram, a circuit diagram used to reflect the working principle of an electronic circuit. It contains basic circuit structure such as power supplies, switches, and components, and has two different connection methods, series and parallel. Please collect, praise, recommend, vote, monthly ticket, and reward. I'm on the recommended position today. Please support me. Chapter 19 Improved Dung Bomb. Lin En had never studied in a muggle university in this life, but he had learned these things in the 9 years of compulsory education in his previous life. Exclamation mark. Since you know circuit diagrams, it's easy. You just need to understand the energy source of the alchemy array as a power source, the rune hub of the alchemy array as a switch, and the various alchemy runes as electronic components. Then the alchemy array will be no difficulty for you. Professor Green said with great joy. It is often very difficult for array alchemists to teach their disciples, because unlike the legal alchemy, which is more practical than theoretical, the array alchemy is extremely difficult in terms of theoretical knowledge. Many talented alchemy apprentices also complain bitterly after being exposed to the array alchemy, especially the alchemy knowledge related to the alchemy array. There are thousands of forms of the alchemy array alone, and these ordinary array alchemists can only memorize it by rote. But Professor Green is different from Lin En. After being able to successfully understand the alchemical array as a circuit diagram and muggle theory, the alchemical array in their eyes no longer has thousands of forms, but only two basic forms of series and parallel connection, because other forms of alchemical arrays can be arranged and combined in different ways of series and parallel connection. After telling Lin En the basic principles of the alchemical array, Professor Green talked about the method of engraving the alchemical array. The engraving of the alchemical array is not simply to carve patterns on the object, but to use a special alchemical carving knife to completely and permanently engrave the alchemist's magic power on the object, forming a closed alchemical circuit, allowing the magic power to flow in the alchemical array. Only in this way can the engraving of the alchemical array be completed. While explaining the method, Professor Green took out a golden carving knife from his pocket. Every alchemist has his own carving knife, but now, you can use mine to carve. Professor Green handed the carving knife to Lin En and said so. Lin En carefully took the carving knife. It was a pure golden carving knife. There seemed to be hundreds of dense alchemical circuits engraved on the carving knife. These alchemical circuits formed dozens of different alchemical arrays. Each alchemical array on this golden carving knife was only the size of a fingernail, which showed how difficult it was to make this golden carving knife. Professor Green used his magic wand to draw two strange runes in the air. He said, these two runes represent the energy source and the rune hub, which are the power supply and switch in the circuit diagram. According to the method I mentioned before, combined with the alchemical runes you have learned, I want you to complete an alchemy in front of me. You can enchant any object, except your wand. Lin En nodded. He hesitated for a moment, and finally took out a dung bomb from his trouser pocket. This was given to him by the Weirlie twins after they purchased goods from Zanko's joke shop. Dung bomb? I just hope you don't make my office so smoky. Professor Green was a little surprised at first, and then said helplessly. Lin En quickly promised that he would not let the dung bomb explode. Lin En sat down in front of Professor Green's desk, and he carefully looked at the dung bomb in his hand. The shell of this dung bomb was not too thick, so Lin En had to be very careful when engraving the alchemical array. Otherwise, once the shell of the dung bomb was pierced, Lin En could imagine the scene of Professor Green hanging himself up and beating him. This dung bomb itself is an alchemical product, but except for the trigger switch, the other alchemical arrays are hidden under the shell, which allows Lin En to engrave a new alchemical array without worrying about destroying the original alchemical array of the dung bomb. Lin En carefully used a golden carving knife to carve an energy source symbol on the shell of the dung bomb. When he carved the rune, he could feel that the golden carving knife was absorbing his magic power. When the golden knife passed through the shell of the dung bomb, the magic power was released from the tip of the golden knife and finally deeply engraved into the shell of the dung bomb, forming a magical rune. After engraving the energy source symbol, Lin En engraved a rune hub on the original trigger switch of the dung bomb, so that the rune hub and the trigger switch overlapped, so that Lin En could make these alchemical arrays take effect while triggering the dung bomb. After completing these 2 strokes, Lin En stopped and held his chin with his palm to think. After a while, he engraved the alchemical runes representing strengthening and diffusion on the shell of the dung bomb. These 2 alchemical runes can strengthen the power of the dung bomb and make the range covered by the stench after the dung bomb explodes spread to twice the original range. After completing the engraving of these 2 alchemical runes, Lin En quickly swung the golden knife, connecting these 2 alchemical runes with the energy source and the rune hub and series, forming a closed loop and becoming an effective alchemical array. Just like that, Lin En's first alchemical work, the improved dung bomb, was completed. Teacher, I'm done. Lin En put down the carving knife, raised the dung bomb and said. Professor Green came over. He bent down, carefully observed the alchemical array engraved by Lin En, then spread his hands and said, in my opinion, the alchemical array you engraved has reached an excellent level. Under normal circumstances, I would ask you to activate the alchemical array and experiment with the effects of alchemical products to practice the truth. But now, forget it. He didn't want the stench of dung bombs to fill his office. That's it for today. You go back first. You have to come to practice engraving the alchemical array every Saturday in the future. Of course, don't bring dung bombs anymore in the future. Professor Green said to Lin En. Lin En smiled awkwardly. He didn't want to, but he was probably the only dung bombs suitable for engraving alchemical arrays. Although clothes can also be used to engrave defensive alchemical arrays, he has not yet started to learn defensive alchemical runes. He can't engrave the explosion rune on his clothes, right? Exclamation mark. That's really going to the toilet with a lantern, looking for death. After leaving the defense against the dark arts professor's office, Lin went to find Fred and George again, and gave them the improved dung bomb he made. Looking at the 2 people's ecstatic appearance, Lin suddenly doubted whether what he did was right or wrong. He couldn't help but mourn for the victim of this improved dung bomb in his heart. In fact, Lin's worry was not groundless. The next morning, Lin heard from Irving Farley that Mr. Filch was hit in the face by a dung bomb and still smelled bad. It's on the recommended position today. Please collect good reviews, recommend votes, rewards, and monthly tickets, and boost the data of this book. Please everyone. Chapter 20 Halloween Crisis. In the next few weeks, Lin En repeatedly learned alchemical runes, went to the defense against the dark arts professor's office on Saturdays to engrave alchemical circles, and improved his alchemy under the guidance of Professor Green. During this period, Lin En's progress in alchemy was rapid, and his wizard robes and accessories became alchemical products engraved with alchemical circles. There were more than a dozen different defensive alchemical circles on his wizard robes, which could make him immune to all spells such as the disarming spell of aura level wizards, and immune to the dark magic of ordinary adult wizards. The strength of these defensive alchemical circles was related to Lin En's own strength. As the magic power in Lin En's body grew with his age, the power of the alchemical circles he made would also increase. Soon, it was Halloween. When the little wizards woke up in the morning, They could smell the sweet and tempting smell of roasted pumpkins floating in the corridor. Countless pumpkin decorations were spread all over Hogwarts Castle, making the festive atmosphere of Halloween even stronger. On this beautiful Halloween, the Weirlight Twins proposed to throw a dung bomb in the hall, but Lin tried his best to stop them. Please, even Professor Flitwick had to spend some effort to remove the dung bomb in your hands. Don't you have any self-awareness? Lin took the dung bomb from the two of them, and his expression was as helpless as he could be. As early as the second day after Lin learned to engrave the alchemy array, he taught the Weirlight Twins how to improve the dung bomb. Although the Weirlight Twins did not know the principle, they still knew how to copy it. After making a simple carving knife, Fred and George have accumulated dozens of improved dung bombs during this period. If these dung bombs are really thrown into the hall, it can be imagined that Gryffinder's house points will definitely be greatly reduced. Although Lin is from Slytherin, they are his friends after all, and he does not want them to be beaten by Professor McGonagall. Okay, you convinced us. Fred and George shrugged and said. At the Halloween dinner, 1,000 bats fluttered on the walls and ceiling of the auditorium, and another 1,000 bats hovered over the dining table like low dark clouds, causing the candle flames in the pumpkins to flicker. Countless delicious dishes suddenly appeared on golden plates, and the richness of the dishes was even greater than that of the opening dinner. Faced with such a feast, even Lin En, who had a small appetite, couldn't help but eat a big bowl. After the dinner, the little wizards dispersed one after another, and the professors on the stage also left one after another. Just as Lin En was about to return to the dormitory and take the opportunity to memorize a few more alchemical runes, he suddenly found that Professor Green, who was leaving, seemed to have a strange look on his face. He could see that there seemed to be murderous intent in Professor Green's light blue eyes. Moreover, the direction Professor Green left was not his defense against the dark arts professor's office. Professor Green was seen heading towards the gate of Hogwarts Castle. After exchanging a few words with Filch, he left the castle, and the direction he left seemed to be Hogsmeade Village. Fred, George, wait. Professor Green seems to be a little bit wrong. Lin grabbed the collars of Fred and George who were about to leave, and said seriously. He had never seen murderous intent in the eyes of the always kind Professor Green. Obviously, Professor Green must have encountered some difficulties. Lin told the Weirlight Twins his analysis, and said to them, I plan to go to Hogsmeade Village one step ahead through the statue of the One-Eyed Witch to see if I can help Professor Green. In addition, my trip may be dangerous. If I don't come back within an hour, you will report the matter to Professor Dumbledore or Professor McGonagall immediately. Lin didn't want to help blindly and arrogantly, but he was sure of it. First, during this period of training, he was able to cast the fire charm without a wand while chanting aloud, and he could also cast other spells like the disarming charm silently. His magic skills were even comparable to those of some new auras. Secondly, the equipment on Lin's body contained a large number of alchemical arrays, which allowed Lin to hold out for at least an hour, even if he encountered a powerful dark wizard. The matter he asked the Weirlight Twins to do was his last resort. If Professor Dumbledore or Professor McGonagall could come to support him, then even if Voldemort himself came, he would probably not be able to kill Lin in the first place. Hearing this, Fred and George looked at each other. No problem, as long as you can come back safely, it doesn't matter, even if the secret passage is exposed. George said. The two did not propose to go with Lin. They knew their own strength. When Lin had already learned the skills of silently casting many spells such as the disarming charm, they could only barely release spells such as the disarming charm. If they really went, they would only hold Lin back. After instructing the two, Lin quickly came to the statue of the One-Eyed Witch. Separate left and right, Lin cast a spell to open the secret passage, passed through the secret passage at the fastest speed, and came to the cellar of Honeydukes. Lin raised his wand and cast an invisibility spell on himself. Lin learned the invisibility spell from Professor Green a week ago. The ability to be invisible greatly improved Lin's self-protection ability. Lin only felt a stream of cold liquid flowing down from the top of his head and all over his body. He raised his hand, but found that his body was completely invisible. Lin quickly climbed out of the cellar and left Honeydukes. Hogsmeade is the largest wizard village in the British wizarding world. If a battle really happened, then the location of the battle must not be inside Hogsmeade. In this way, the final location is clear, that is the entrance to Hogsmeade. Lin En walked towards the entrance of Hogsmeade under the disillusionment spell. After turning a corner, the entrance of Hogsmeade Village appeared in his sight, but at the same time, a black-robed wizard with his mouth and nose covered appeared in his sight. Seeing this black-robed wizard, Lin En's heart was alarmed. Even though he was nearly 100 meters away from the other party, Lin En did not dare to move at all. He stood still, staring at the other party's feet instead of staring at the other party. If this black-robed wizard is really a powerful black wizard, then the other party must have the ability to identify the disillusionment spell. Therefore, it is definitely not a rational choice to approach the other party rashly. Powerful wizards are generally able to perceive the gazes on themselves, which is why Lin En dared not look directly at the other party. All this knowledge was taught to him by Professor Green, and these experiences from Professor Green's personal experience have benefited him a lot. Today, I recommend this book. Please support it. The more recommendation votes and rewards, the better. Thank you all. Chapter 21, Fierce Fighting, the ultimate in formation alchemy. Lin's whole body was tense, and he kept his original posture, letting the cold wind of Hogsmeade blow. After about 10 minutes, a slow sound of footsteps was heard. Castellac. It has been more than 40 years since Grindelwald was defeated by Dumbledore. Are you still not giving up? Professor Green's voice came, with a bit of coldness in his tone. Castellac was obviously the surname of the black-robed wizard, and according to Professor Green's words, Castellac should be one of Grindelwald's subordinates when Grindelwald was rampant. Castellac spoke, his voice was hoarse and full of hatred. I have been hunting you for more than 40 years, Green. You hurt the Great Master with that damn muggle weapon. You are a humiliation to the Master. As a member of the Saints, I must kill you. Hearing this, Professor Green chuckled. Master? Saint? Castellac, you are nothing but a stray dog who was expelled from the Saints by Grindelwald himself. What qualifications do you have to say this? Hearing Professor Green's slightly sarcastic words, Castellac became even crazier. Expelled? If those 3 damn muggles hadn't suddenly appeared while I was hunting you and died in my fiery curse, how could the Master have expelled me? Green, you and I have a sworn enemy, and today it's time to settle the score. Professor Green drew his wand, and without hesitation, he took the initiative and cast a silent disarming spell, but sighed, forget it, now I'm a professor at Hogwarts. In order to prevent you from going crazy and involving my students, you must die here today. Castellac waved his wand, and a silent armor spell was released. A flash of blue light collided with Professor Green's disarming spell, and finally cancelled each other out, and exploded at the same time. Thunder explosion. Professor Green waved his wand again, and a yellow light flashing with a dangerous aura burst out. While releasing the explosion spell, Professor Green gently waved his left hand, and a silent and wandless spell was cast. A grey-white light broke through the air at an extremely tricky angle in Castellac's blind spot, and attacked Castellac in the direction of the explosion spell one after another. This greyish-white light was a shattering spell, and the spell was shattered to pieces. Its effect was equivalent to the youth version of the blasting spell, which could blow up solid obstacles, but could not cause a second large-scale explosion. Although Castellac did not see Professor Green's little move, his years of combat experience told him that Professor Green's attack could not be that simple. Universal protection. Castellac waved his wand, and used huge magic power to protect the area within a radius of 1 meter. As expected, 2 spells exploded at the edge of his universal protection barrier, and the violent explosion dimmed the light of the universal protection. Shattered into pieces. Castellac shook the wand in his hand quickly. He only chanted the spell once, but dozens of cutting spells broke through the air and shot towards Professor Green with the force of thunder. This is an extremely clever way of casting a spell. High frequency shaking of the wand can block the continuous transmission of magic power in Castellac's body, so that magic power can only enter the wand intermittently. Castellac's high proficiency in the cutting spell can turn each section of magic power into a weakened version of the cutting spell. In this way, the original cutting spell was transformed into dozens of cutting spells with slightly less power, which increased the danger factor of this spell. Fire all the bullets. Professor Green first smashed a stone on the ground with a silent crushing spell, and then used the million bullets to make these countless stone fragments burst out and face the dozens of grey lights in the air. These stone fragments hit the light in the air accurately, and bursts of explosions were heard in the air. Professor Green actually intercepted all the cutting spells with less loss. However, Casilac's attack frequency seemed to be getting faster and faster. Unlike the ordinary magic used by Professor Green, the spells cast by Casillas are mainly black magic. When the strength of both sides is similar, the power of black magic will obviously be superior. As an alchemist, Professor Green's attainments in black magic are naturally not as good as those of the battle-hardened saints. Even though Casillas is an expelled saint, a ball of black and red flame was thrown out by Casillas. This ball of flame devoured everything that could be devoured, and continued to grow. Finally, it turned into animal forms such as giant flaming snakes and flaming hounds, and rushed towards Professor Green. This level of fierce fire is definitely not something that can be extinguished by a spell. Faced with this dilemma, Professor Green had to use his most proficient alchemy. Only a powerful alchemist like Professor Green can truly use alchemy on the battlefield. Professor Green raised his wand and waved it. All chemical runes were imprinted in the air without the assistance of a carving knife or even any objects as carriers. These all-chemical runes flashed with golden light, connected by a golden magic thread, and turned into an all-chemical array. The formation of this all-chemical array was only a moment, and with the output of Professor Green's magic power, countless beams of light burst out from this all-chemical array, bombarding the flame creatures transformed by the fierce fire that flew over. The golden light poured down like a meteor shower, and it actually suppressed these flame creatures, so that they couldn't raise their heads. Looking at this scene from afar, which seemed like the arrival of the Lord God, Lin En couldn't help but be fascinated. I'm afraid this is the ultimate of the array alchemist. Lin En thought so in his heart. On the battlefield, Kishirachi was under the golden light, but he didn't have any intention of retreating. Magic power was constantly released by Kishirachi, and groups of fierce fire were born, and they kept killing Professor Green. At the same time, Professor Green had completed the imprint of the fifth all-chemical array. 5 all-chemical arrays surrounded Professor Green, like a laser matrix. Countless golden beams poured out like a hail of bullets, bombarding the flaming creatures that rushed over. The battle was at a stalemate. Casilac's fiery curse and Professor Green's all-chemical array seemed to have formed a delicate balance, and neither side could defeat the other. Lin En, who was not far away, was anxious. He wanted to help Professor Green, but he also knew that with his current level of magic, if he really took action, he would only be a cannon fodder. After all, even the residual power of the two people's battle was enough to blow Lin En into slag. Please recommend, reward and monthly votes, everyone. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 22. The magic forbidden scepter shows its power for the first time, and every shot from the muggle guns is a head chewing. More than 10 minutes passed under the battle between gold and red and black. Even though the two powers are equally powerful, their masters always have to run out of energy. At this time, the light emitted by the 5 all-chemical arrays around Professor Green gradually dimmed, and the magic power in Professor Green's body seemed to be on the verge of exhaustion. Seeing this, Casilac couldn't help but reveal a triumphant smile. You know, his fierce fire can autonomously devour everything around it that can be devoured, and thus continue to grow, while Professor Green's all-chemical array relies entirely on the magic power of Professor Green. In this case of unequal magic output, it would be strange if Professor Green could hold on to the end. Looking at the successful Casilac, Professor Green's face was livid. If he had died at the hands of Grindelwald back then, he would have accepted it, but now that he has met Lin, a genius disciple with extraordinary talent, he finally has hope of solving the problem that he has been unable to solve for a long time, as if everything is going in a good direction. But at this moment, he was going to die at the hands of Casillas, a stray dog. How could he accept this? Exclamation mark. He was unwilling. Professor Green growled, and the alchemical array around him once again shone with light. However, once the magic power was exhausted, it was exhausted. It was not something that could be replenished by just a roar. Even if Professor Green was unwilling, he could only watch the alchemical array around him dim again, and the hound transformed by the fierce fire kept breaking through the defense line and biting towards him. In the distance, Lin En could no longer sit still. Even if he was a human being in two lives, Lin En could not sit still and watch his mentor die. At this moment, Lin En had an idea in his mind. He seemed to remember something and quickly fumbled for something in the canvas bag on his waist that had cast the traceless stretching spell. Soon, Lin En's face was happy and he took out a 1-meter long scepter from the canvas bag. The magic forbidden scepter. Looking at the exquisite scepter in his hand, Lin En recalled Professor Green's introduction to the scepter. This scepter is a one-time activated anti-magic scepter. After you inject magic power into it, it can burst out the power of the anti-magic stone, suppressing the magic power within a radius of 100 meters, making wizards within the range unable to cast magic like a squib. However, the anti-magic scepter can only suppress the magic power of aura level at most, and its effect on Demon King level wizards is extremely limited. You know, at this time, Lin En was less than 100 meters away from the battlefield where Casilak and Professor Green were, and Casilak's strength was obviously not as strong as Grindelwald's Demon King level, otherwise Professor Green would not have been able to fight him for so long. Please, anti-magic scepter. Lin En grabbed the anti-magic scepter with force, and at the moment, when the hound transformed by Fiendfy pounced on Professor Green, and was about to bite off Professor Green's neck, he suddenly injected magic power into it. A buzzing sound was heard, and a visible light wave quickly spread in all directions. In just a moment, the area of 100 meters around Lin En was covered by the power of the forbidden magic scepter. Those hounds transformed by the fiend fire seemed to have encountered dozens of auras chanting all spells end at the same time, and disappeared without a trace in an instant. Not only that, the light on the top of Casilak's wand and the dimming alchemical array around Professor Green were broken and dissipated like smoke. How is it possible? Feeling the magic power in his body being completely suppressed and unable to be mobilized, Casilak exclaimed. Professor Green looked in the direction of Lin En with a complicated expression. After the power of the forbidden magic scepter was activated, Lin En's illusion silk spell had already failed, revealing Lin En's original figure. I didn't expect that the gift I gave you would end up being used on myself. Professor Green smiled bitterly, patted the dust on his clothes that was stained after being knocked down by the fiend firehound, and stood up. Lin En rushed over quickly. He took out the dagger enchanted with the sharp attribute given to him by Professor Green from his pocket, and stabbed it into Casillas's chest. Puff, puff, puff. Casillas didn't react for a while, and was stabbed 3 times in a row by Lin En. However, because Lin En stabbed too anxiously, none of his 3 stabs hit Casillas's vital points, which gave Casillas a chance to fight back. Lin En, who had never experienced a real battle, was naturally no match for the battle-hardened former saint. Casillas slapped the dagger in Lin En's hand away, turned over and pressed Lin En under him, and strangled Lin En's neck with both hands, trying to strangle Lin En to death. In the absence of anyone being able to cast magic, Professor Green, who was more than 10 meters away from Lin En, had no time to save him. Lin En struggled constantly with the feeling of suffocation, but after all, he was only 11 years old. Even if he exercised regularly, he was no match for Casillas in terms of physical fitness. Bang, 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 bang. But just when Lin En thought he was going to be strangled to death, a series of gunshots came, and the hand that was pinching Lin En's throat loosened, giving Lin En a chance to breathe. Lin En pushed Casillas's body away with force, gasping for breath. When he recovered and looked at Casillas, he was horrified to find that the other's head was now covered with blood holes. In the absence of a Demon King level wizard, my magic forbidden scepter can achieve equality for all beings, and at this time, some muggle weapons can play a very good role. Professor Green walked over slowly, with a metal gun in his hand still smoking. Obviously, what Casillas said before the battle, that Professor Green used a muggle gun to hurt his master, was referring to the damage that Professor Green caused to Grindelwald with a gun, after activating the magic forbidden staff. Of course, even if the power of the muggle gun was strong, it was not enough to kill Grindelwald, who still had the ability to cast spells. And what happened afterwards, Lin had already heard from Professor Green. Thank you, Professor. Lin struggled to stand up. Fortunately, he had the help of Professor Green's gun, otherwise he might really die in Casilac's hands. Hearing this, Professor Green shook his head, his eyes revealed a guilty look, and at the same time with the guilt, there was also a kind of closeness to his own child. No, Lin, I should apologize to you. As your teacher and your professor, I failed to protect you and put you in danger. This is my dereliction of duty. Professor Green was very glad that he had enough trust in Lin, his disciple, and even made a magic forbidden staff for him. Otherwise, not only himself, but also Lin En, a gifted child, will be implicated and die. If this is really the case, then Professor Green will not forgive himself, even if he goes to hell. Please give me a good review, recommend votes, monthly votes and rewards. Thank you everyone. Chapter 23 Christmas. Lin En shook his head. He didn't care about the danger just now. Nothing in the world is foolproof. If he was really afraid of being in danger, he wouldn't have come here. Lin En looked at Professor Green with burning eyes and said, Teacher, I want to learn your method of carving alchemy arrays out of thin air and fighting with alchemy arrays. Hearing this, Professor Green was stunned. He didn't expect Lin En to be watching their fight so early. He thought that Lin En just came when he was about to give up. But soon, Professor Green's eyes showed some relief. With Kasiragi and his strength, he was fully able to perceive the movements around him. Since Lin En was not discovered by them, it meant that Lin En must have listened to his previous advice to Lin En and put it into practice. However, Professor Green shook his head at Lin's request and said, whether it is engraving an alchemy array without a chisel, or engraving an alchemy array without any carrier, it requires a huge amount of magic power as a foundation. With your current magic power growth rate, I can teach you how to compress magic power and use a wand instead of a chisel in your 4th grade, and in your 5th grade, I will teach you how to create an alchemy array out of thin air without any carrier. As for now, all you need to do is improve your alchemy level and create your own chisel. Professor Green said so. Lin nodded with a little disappointment. It was a fact that the magic power foundation in his body was one of his biggest shortcomings at present. I have to go back, teacher. Lin estimated the time. If he returned immediately, he would have time to return to the castle before the Weir Light Winds reported to the professor. Professor Green waved his hand, indicating that Lin should go back first. So, Lin returned the same way and returned to the castle from the hole of the one-eyed witch sculpture. Luckily you're back. If you were 2 minutes later, we would have to report to Professor Dumbledore. Seeing Lin coming back, George breathed a sigh of relief. Fred found the scar on Lin's neck. His face became serious and he said, Lin, you're injured. What danger did you encounter? Lin shook his head and said, nothing. I just met a dark wizard. I defeated him with the alchemy product given to me by Professor Green. Unfortunately, I didn't meet Professor Green in Hogsmeade Village, so I had to return the same way. Lin didn't tell the truth, because the existence of the magic forbidden wand was a secret between Lin and Professor Green, and it shouldn't be disclosed to the outside world at this time. Even if the Weir Light Winds were his friends, he wouldn't just reveal Professor Green's privacy. That's good. Fred breathed a sigh of relief. Lin forced a smile and said, okay, it's all a false alarm. It's time to enjoy a Halloween next. Hearing this, Fred and George cheered. In the next 2 months, Lin returned to his normal study life. He and Professor Green tacitly did not mention what happened on Halloween night. Lin's learning progress in various subjects continued to advance. In the transfiguration class, he could easily transform dead objects and transform small animals such as cockroaches and mice into dead objects such as buttons and vases. Basically, Lin could win extra points for Slytherin College in every class. In the Charms class, he could silently cast all the spells in the first year course. After class, he even learned some silent casting techniques for spells in the second and third year courses from Professor Flitwick. Lin's performance made Professor Flitwick call him a genius. In the potions class, Lin's talent for potions seemed to be gradually awakening. When refining potions, his partner was often Irving Fly. The cooperation between the two became more and more skillful, and the relationship of partners in the potions class also made Lin and Irving become good friends. Of course, there are some subjects that Lin En is not good at, such as biology and astronomy. Lin En's talent in these two subjects is not very high. If the final exam comes, Lin En estimates that he can only get an E representing good and cannot easily get an O representing excellent, like defense against the dark arts, transfiguration, charms, and potions. As for the history of magic course, Professor Binns' teaching method is really hypnotic. Even a paper king like Lin En has to treat it as his own sleep class. But even so, just self-studying the history of magic textbook is enough for Lin En to easily get excellent. In addition to these compulsory courses for the little wizards from the 1st to the 5th grade, there is also a flying class that only first year freshmen need to take. Lin En is not very outstanding in the flying class, which makes him take a natural attitude towards it. The weather is getting colder, and Merlin seems to have changed into thick wool socks. In mid to late December, Christmas at Hogwarts has arrived. In the early morning, Hogwarts Castle woke up from the dream. The castle was covered with several feet of snow, and the surface of the Black Lake was frozen. Several owls delivered mail in the wind and rain. They had gone through untold hardships. Only after they recovered their strength under the care of Hagrid could they continue to take off. The little wizards were eager to go on vacation. Although there were blazing fires in the common rooms and auditoriums of various colleges to bring warmth to the little wizards, the corridors with drafts were still very cold and biting, and the windows of the classrooms were also rattling in the biting cold wind. On Christmas Day, even Lin slept in for a rare time. When he got up, he found 7 gifts at the foot of the bed. Lin opened the first square-wrapped gift. This gift was sent by his mother Irina through the owl of the post office. Inside was a beautifully crafted silver one-handed sword. This was what Lin wrote a week ago, hoping his mother would send to him. In the past month, Lin En's clothes have been engraved with all chemical arrays, and there is no room for more. His other things are not suitable for engraving all chemical arrays, so the arrival of this one-handed sword just solved his urgent need. The next 3 gifts were given by Professor McGonagall, Professor Flitwick and Professor Snape. This may be a reward for Lin En's excellent performance in class. To be honest, Lin En didn't expect that Professor Snape, a cold and arrogant man, would give him a Christmas gift. I feel that the recent data is really bad, and I don't know if it will get better in the future. But I will work hard and try to stick to it. Chapter 24 Mithril Carving Knife. Lin opened the 3 Christmas gifts one by one. Professor McGonagall gave a transfiguration notebook, which recorded Professor McGonagall's transfiguration experience when she was young. Lin was pleasantly surprised to find Professor McGonagall's method on how to apply transfiguration to actual combat. However, from the brittle texture of the paper, it can be seen that this transfiguration notebook should have been copied using the copy double spell. But even so, Lin was very happy. Professor Flitwick gave a wand maintenance kit to help Lin maintain his wand. Professor Snape gave a bottle of joy potion, which Lin thought should be left for Professor Snape to drink. After opening the gifts from the 3 professors, Lin picked up 2 more gifts, which came from Irving and the Weir Lightwinds. Irving's gift was a pocket looking glass, but unfortunately Irving didn't know that Lin had already learned how to make a looking glass. The Weir Lightwind's gift was a set of Honeydukes snacks, which Fred and George bought with the gold galleons they had saved up over the past month by improving the dung bomb. At this time, Lin opened the last gift, which came from his teacher, Professor Green. This is the Forbidden Magic Wand. Looking at the gift in the package, Lin was stunned. During the Halloween crisis, Lin activated the Forbidden Magic Wand given to him by Professor Green, which allowed him to save Professor Green from the dying from the hands of the Dark Wizard. But the activation of the Forbidden Magic Wand meant that this one-time all-chemical item was invalid. Unexpectedly, Professor Green actually refined another Forbidden Magic Wand as Lin's Christmas gift. Lin put away the Forbidden Magic Wand and couldn't help but feel a little moved. After opening the gift, Lin left the dormitory and came to the auditorium on the 1st floor of the castle. At the door of the auditorium, Fred and George came towards him. "Thanks, Lin. We like your gift very much," Fred and George said in unison. What Lin gave them was a sorted alchemy notebook and a list of books that he had selected based on the list of books that Professor Green had provided him, which were suitable for the Weir Lightwinds to study on their own. "I like your gifts, too," Lin said with a smile. He took out a Bibby multi-flavor bean from his pocket, gestured to the 2, and threw it into his mouth. fuck? It smells like stinky socks. Lin's move caused the two to laugh. After a while, after the two had recovered, Lin said, "Okay, I have to go to the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office to find Professor Green. See you later." "See you later." Fred and George waved. After saying goodbye to the two, Lin went to the Defense Against the Dark Arts professor's office. "Teacher, I'm here. Thank you for your magic forbidden scepter." Lin bowed slightly to Professor Green and said. Professor Green just smiled. He called Lin En to an alchemy table. This alchemy table was specially used to engrave alchemy arrays. Unlike engraving alchemy arrays on the desk on weekdays, this alchemy table can help the alchemist concentrate his attention, strengthen the ability to concentrate magic power, and increase the success rate. Your recent progress in alchemy learning has almost reached the standard for refining a carving knife. It's time to make a carving knife of your own. Everything is up to you. I will supervise you, Professor Green said. He waved his wand and dozens of different materials appeared on the alchemy table. Lin En was prepared for this. He sat down in front of the alchemy table, then raised his hand, and took out a mithril carving knife blank from the pile of materials. At the same time, the other materials on the alchemy table disappeared, and Professor Green's golden carving knife appeared next to Lin En. Lin En skillfully picked up the golden carving knife and engraved a symbol representing the energy source on the handle of the mithril carving knife blank, and then engraved the rune hub slightly above. Then, Lin En took out a pair of special glasses from his pocket. This pair of glasses engraved with all chemical arrays could act like a microscope, allowing Lin En to accurately see the position of each cut. As time passed, complete all chemical arrays appeared on the mithril carving knife, and the light flashing from the mithril carving knife became more and more dazzling. 3 hours passed. Lin En gently made the last stroke on the mithril carving knife, connecting the last all chemical array with the rune hub and energy source in series, and completely completed the refining of the mithril carving knife. The mithril carving knife seemed to have gained a new life. A burst of explosion sounded, and countless excess mithril metal powders burst out from its blade and turned into dots of light. This mithril carving knife looked extremely sharp, and even Professor Green's golden carving knife seemed to be slightly inferior to it. Of course, this was indeed the case. You know, a carving knife, like a magic wand, can accompany an alchemist throughout his life. Although Professor Green is now a famous French alchemist, he was just an alchemy apprentice like Lin when he made the golden carving knife, and the golden carving knife he made at that time was naturally not of a very high level. Perfect carving knife. Remember, Lin, this carving knife will accompany you throughout your life. Never abandon it, Professor Green said in admiration, and the strength of this mithril carving knife really shocked him. Lin held the mithril carving knife in both hands and nodded vigorously. Professor Green turned around and took out a box from a cabinet not far away. The box was covered with all chemical arrays. Professor Green handed the box to Lin En and said, "This box is used to store the chisel. The all chemical array on it has the effect of maintaining the chisel." Lin En opened the box. It looked solid inside, but when Lin En tried to put the mithril chisel on it, the solid part inside the box began to twist and change, and finally a space that could just accommodate Lin En's mithril chisel appeared. Lin En carefully put the box away and thanked Professor Green again. Professor Green said, "In the next half school year, you just need to continue to learn more alchemical runes and enrich your foundation. And in our class every Saturday, I plan to teach you some practical skills. How about it?" In the past month, Lin En's attainments in alchemy are no less than those of an ordinary alchemist, and deeper alchemical knowledge can only be exposed to Lin En after Lin En's magic power reserves have increased further. Therefore, Professor Green currently has nothing to teach Lin En in terms of alchemy. Hearing Professor Green's words, Lin En was overjoyed. He still remembers clearly the feeling of powerlessness when facing the Black Wizard on Halloween, so the desire to improve his ability to use magic and improve his fighting skills has long filled Lin's heart. I looked at the data and found that the number of people following the book is less than 1/10 of that of my friends during the same period. I feel a little uncomfortable. If possible, I hope everyone can read the latest chapter and vote to boost the data. Please help. Chapter 25. Practical Training. The Magical Use of Transfiguration. Hogwarts Christmas has a total of more than a week of vacation. Lin did not intend to waste this time. Early the next morning, Lin found Professor Green, hoping to start his practical course in advance. After learning of Lin's idea, although Professor Green was a little surprised, he readily agreed, no problem. However, my office can't accommodate our fight. Come with me. With that, Professor Green took the lead in leaving the defense against the dark arts professor's office. Professor Green took Lin out of Hogwarts Castle and walked all the way to the Forbidden Forest. After walking for more than 10 minutes, the scenery in front of Lin suddenly became clear. In front of Lin was no longer an endless dense forest, but a huge open space of more than 100 meters in radius. This is a venue that Dumbledore and I specially vacated after applying. Our future practical courses will be held here. However, without my guidance, you'd better not come alone, because next to it is the nest of the 8-eyed giant spider tribe. Professor Green came to the center of the venue and said to Lin. Lin nodded and followed him into the venue. He placed his wand in front of his chest, bowed slightly to Professor Green, and performed a duel etiquette. Before Lin could stand up straight, a red light burst out from the direction of Professor Green. Lin understood that the battle had already begun. Armor protection. Lin quickly dodged the red light and subconsciously cast an armor spell on himself. A grey-white light in front of Lin's left collided with the armor spell, and was finally bounced off by the armor spell. As expected, Lin exclaimed in his heart that it was a close call. After witnessing the battle between Professor Green and Cassilici on Halloween night, Lin knew that Professor Green's moves would definitely not be that simple. As expected, while Professor Green silently cast the disarming spell, he also followed it with a silent crushing spell. If Lin had not been sufficiently vigilant in his heart, I'm afraid he would have been hit. Burning flames. Lin quickly chanted the spell, and a ball of flame flew out of his wand. Although he was able to cast spells silently, the fire spell cast by chanting the spell was often more powerful. The flames continued to spread in the air, forming a trend of burning the sky and boiling the sea above the venue, covering the direction of Professor Green. Clear water like a spring. Professor Green swung his wand, and a stream of water broke through the air and greeted the raging flames. The flames and the water collided, and countless steam exploded, covering the entire battlefield. The vision of the two was blocked by the thick white fog, and neither of them could see each other. Lin En cast a hushing spell on himself to hide his footsteps, and then he took a step and ran, changing his position. Lin En waved his wand and threw several silent disarming spells towards Professor Green's original position, but received no response. Seeing this, Lin En understood that Professor Green must have used the same method as himself. At this moment, a cutting spell broke through the air and barely brushed Lin En's shoulder, which frightened Lin En so much that he ran faster. While running, Lin En also quickly cast 3 disarming spells, which were directed towards the direction from which the cutting spell came just now, as well as the left and right sides of this direction. Lin En's prediction was correct. The disarming spell that was shot to the right was blocked by the armor spell, but this armor spell also exposed Professor Green's position. So, Lin En quickly cast a spell, raised his left hand, and used wandless casting to throw out a large ball of flames from the palm of his left hand. The ball of flames expanded rapidly, covering Professor Green from all directions, and Professor Green was blocked by countless spells from Lin En in front of him, which made it impossible for him to change his position before the flames surrounded him. Lin En couldn't help but smile. In his opinion, he had passed this practical training. The battle between Lin En and Professor Green was just a practical class, so Professor Green did not use alchemy to fight, and Professor Green also suppressed his magic power to the same level as Lin En, which gave Lin En the opportunity to besiege Professor Green. But just when Lin En thought he had won, and was about to open the champagne at halftime, something strange happened. In Lin En's blind spot, the stones on the ground suddenly bulged upwards, and these stones suddenly turned into more than a dozen pythons as thick as thighs, and they entangled with Lin En at lightning speed. These pythons quickly entangled Lin En's thighs, waist, arms, and neck, and pressed Lin En to the spot. The last python flexibly rushed over, first flicked its tail to knock the wand in Lin En's hand away, and then locked Lin En's left hand tightly with its body, interrupting his wandless fire spell. Without the supply of magic power, the flame that was about to burn the corner of Professor Green's clothes instantly lost control, and was easily extinguished by Professor Green. In battle, the enemy often pays attention to the magic spell flying from the front and ignores the magic of transfiguration. If you can use transfiguration skillfully and combine it with actual combat, then it will definitely bring you a different surprise. Professor Green walked forward with a smile. He waved his wand, and the python wrapped around Lin En lost its vitality and turned back into the original stone. Lin En couldn't help but smile bitterly. Didn't he want to use it? He just got Professor McGonagall's transfiguration notes yesterday, and he didn't have time to read it yet. Continue. Professor Green didn't say much, just retreated to the original position. Lin En stood up and retreated to his original position. After saluting again, Lin En took the initiative and cast a disarming spell. Professor Green slightly turned sideways to avoid the disarming spell, and his hand holding the wand was behind his back. Seeing this scene, Lin En immediately had an ominous premonition. Without even looking at it, he raised his wand and threw out a flame, burning behind him. Sizzle. I saw dozens of snakes transformed from branches were burned to ashes by the flames. These snakes transformed from branches were also controlled by Professor Green's transfiguration. Annoying transfiguration. Lin En cursed inwardly. He didn't know how to use transfiguration in battle, and he could only retreat again and again in the face of Professor Green's transfiguration. Undoubtedly, with one less fighting method than his opponent, Lin En lost again. However, Professor Green had no intention of letting Lin En go, and the repeated continue made Lin En a little desperate. Since he couldn't escape, Lin En had to focus all his energy on the battle. He began to try to imitate Professor Green's spellcasting method, controlling the surrounding branches and stones with transfiguration, and forming an effective attack on Professor Green. Under Professor Green's high-pressure training, Lin En's transfiguration level is gradually improving. Please recommend, reward, and read. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.